Because surely if they knew who God was in their heart, if they knew we are all one, and that what you do to somebody else, you do to yourself, come on, obviously they wouldn't be beating this person up right now. By hating them in my heart, do I add anything positive to the universe? I clearly don't, right? If I judge the murderer, I'm in a sense creating the murderer, because in the collective consciousness, all minds are joined.
Traveling to consciousness, exploring spiritual journeys to find answers in uncertainty.
What is up, conscious monkeys? Welcome to another episode of Traveling to Consciousness. As always, I'm your host, Clayton Kuteri. Today's guest has a journey that I actually see a lot of parallels of my own in, so I'm super excited for this one. He was raised in the church. He was heavily interested in fitness. He's now heavily interested in helping humanity expand from 3D to 4D consciousness. He goes deep on the law of attraction. He goes deep on the law of one. He goes deep on Kundalini and Kriya yoga. I hope I said that right, but we'll find out. Beautiful. Conscious monkeys, welcome to the show, Aaron Abke. Aaron, thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me, man. It's a pleasure to be joining you.
It's great to have you, man. I mean, I came across your YouTube channel, and I think probably the most popular video that you put out about the astral realm. Mm-hmm. And, I originally shot you a message then, didn't see it all good. So I'm just honored to have you on here after diving even deeper into the stuff you're talking about. Honestly, the alignment couldn't be any deeper, in my opinion.
I love it, man. I'm excited to hear about it.
Well, speaking about hearing about things, I want to hear about kind of how you got started, because I saw, you had this like evangelical upbringing. It sounds like you went to the church route and had kind of a rude awakening. So I'd love to hear in your own words, how did you make this transition from an evangelical church pastor life into this world of the unknown and what society deems as kind of woo-woo in some aspects?
Well, it definitely happened unwittingly on my part. I would have never expected to be where I am today, at the point where I decided to leave Christianity at 23. I had no freaking clue what my life was going to look like at that point, because it sounds like you've done the same thing where you grew up religious and had to kind of step away. Is that right?
Yeah, I was brought up Presbyterian, and then some things about the church rattled me a bit, and it pushed me to dig for deeper answers. And so I believe in the Bible in a certain way, and maybe we can get to that, but I believe there's more answers than just what the Bible holds.
Same. I actually think the Bible is way better than Christians give it credit for. In a lot of ways. We'll get into that.
Okay.
So when I grew up a super devout Christian, a pastor's kid, wanted to follow my dad's footsteps, be a pastor, work in ministry, went to Oral Roberts University in Tulsa to get my bachelor's degree in music and theology, and started my worship pastor career at 22. And by the time I turned 23, I'd just gotten married at 23 and moved back to San Jose to take my first church job. And I'd been there for maybe 3 months before the internal conflict was just going crazy inside of me, because my parents' church growing up, we had a very, we call it spirit-filled church, very charismatic, saw a lot of miracles, a lot of healing miracles. We would have these long worship services. We didn't really talk about who's going to hell, the rapture. Weren't super hard line on biblical inerrancy, although we believed the Bible was inerrant. We just didn't thump it over people's heads, So I didn't have to deal with the dogmatic fundamentalism of Christianity until I got my first church job at a church in my hometown in San Jose that was very legalistic and fundamentalist. And so I was bumping up against all this internal conflict, listening to a sermon every week about who's going to hell, why we're the only right religion, and all these people are lost, and women are inferior to men, and all this kind of stuff that just didn't sit right with me. One example is, I think it was my second or third week there. This lady goes up on stage to give an offering testimony, as often happens in church, where, I gave 10% of my income last year, and this year God blessed me with a new car or whatever. And she gets up to give this testimony, and a guy follows her on stage and stands behind her with his arms behind his back like this, just looking all stoic. And so I'm thinking, like, is this guy a bodyguard or something? Like, what is he doing up there? And then as her speech went on, I started to kind of figure out what I thought was going on. And sure enough, when they walked off stage, they held hands, and he walked her down the stage, and they sat next to each other. And I went, oh my gosh, did I just see what I think I just saw? Like, these people actually believe what it says in Galatians or something, where it's like a woman should never speak alone in church. If she does, her husband should stand behind her as her covering. For the woman sinned first and then the man. So the woman is of greater sin than the man is, and all the stuff Paul says. So I'm like, wow, these people actually believe that stuff. And it felt so gross in my body to be in that moment. Like, this woman is seen as being inherently less valuable or spiritual or something because she's a woman. I don't believe in that God. I'm sorry. I don't believe in that God. And so really quickly, it forced me into a corner to be like, okay, Aaron, do you believe in this version of God or not? Because if you don't, you need to get the hell out of here, because it's insufferable to sit in this church service every Sunday. And so that's the decision I made. And you know how it is, right? When you're going to leave a religion, you're risking blowing up your entire life, losing all your friends, potentially all of your family. And then you got to figure out what the hell you do believe about reality and who's in charge of it and where do we come from and where do we go when we die. So there's all these different items bearing down on your consciousness when you're thinking about, should I leave my religion or not? And so I've been wrestling with those questions for the better part of 3 or 4 years, even through college. I always hated fundamentalism, but just put up with it. But it got to the point where I couldn't bear the internal conflict anymore. So I pulled the trigger and said, okay, I'm willing to lose all of that. And I did. I lost all of my friends. I lost my entire life, my entire worldview. Everybody in my family, other than my parents and my sister, basically disowned me as a heretic. And still, if we see each other at family gatherings, they'll be cordial. But I know the stuff that they say about me, online and stuff, which is, oh, this, my poor nephew is backslidden heretic, and now he's a cult leader, and he's on YouTube and stuff. So, I mean, I was correct about what I was going to lose for the most part, but what I was going to gain, I couldn't have imagined. I couldn't have ever understood what was waiting for me on the other side of that courage to just take that leap of faith and trust God with your life. And number one is what I'm doing now, which is teaching full time and helping people heal their mind and um, alleviate themselves from all the suffering they're causing themselves. Every day I wake up with so much gratitude in my heart to be doing what I do. I couldn't have imagined a more fulfilling life than this. So it's, it's one of those moments in our lives that everything changes. And at the time, it seems like the worst possible thing. And then in the future, you look back and go, that was the best thing that could have ever happened to me.
Dude, that's a crazy moment to experience, right? Is like all that pressure that kind of builds up on you. Because I experienced something similar in a different realm, but that feeling of that like unknown, because you don't know what's going to happen. I mean, you have that presupposition that everything is going to fall apart. And even when it's such a cornerstone, I feel like even with you, I mean, it might even be stronger. It was such a cornerstone of your life, the religion, the way that you would go about the world. You even had a wife at the time who I'm assuming was related to that same exact religion, that same exact ideology.
Yeah.
And even that, like, I can only imagine the ramifications within the societal structure, because I know that the religion holds, marriage and staying committed to your wife
Yeah.
in such higher regards as well, where to have that sort of backlash would be, it could be so devastating. And, first of all, kudos to you for pushing through that. And I guess I'm interested in the miracles you were talking about, but while we're on this subject of courage, was that moment of that woman and the woman giving the speech and the man leading her back, was that the main point or the main catalyst that really I guess, had a pivot in your mind to say, kind of fuck it. Like, if I am going to do stuff that I fear, it's like, this isn't right. And so I'm willing to do stuff that I fear to pursue a deeper truth in name of what I'm supposed to actually be here for. Like, was that the catalyst moment, you would say, that really pushed you over the edge?
It was a catalyst for sure. It wasn't the straw that broke the camel's back moment. There was a moment, there was a straw moment that happened. There was really three major incidents that happened that shook me. Another one was sitting in a pastor's meeting every Monday. We had our pastor's meetings, and the faculty would meet in this big, long round table in the church office. And the youth pastor, his name was Brad. He was this kind of he was really high on his horse. He thought he was like the best preacher that God had ever created and stuff. And he would get really in his ego about it a lot. And so he was the one leading the the meeting that day. And you always knew whenever Brad was leading the pastoral meeting that it was going to be this big dramatic sermon he was going to put on. And so he did. And he was talking about how there's all these homeless people here in downtown San Jose around our buildings, and they're all going to burn in hell forever if you and you and you. And he went around the whole table to all like 15 people and pointed his finger at their face and like made sure to give them a moment of like, yeah, I'm talking to you. And then he finished the circle, and you don't go out there and preach the gospel to them. Do you understand that? They're going to go to hell forever because you didn't have the courage to go preach the truth to them. And I just about wanted to flip that table over and walk out and be like, I'm done. I'm out of this crazy place. I can't be around you people anymore. There's no way you believe that that's what God is like. Like, God's going to let someone else be tortured forever because I didn't have the courage to. What about them? What about their say in the matter? Like, what if they were born up in a house with their mom's a prostitute and a drug addict, and their dad left them at 1 year old, and they have no father figure, and they're out on the streets, and they get hooked on drugs, and now they're on meth, and now they're homeless, and God's going to then take them from that horrendously shitty life and then throw them in hell and torture them forever? Like, you guys are out of your minds if you think that's who God is. That was the second big catalyst. The final one was one day I was walking out to the foyer of the church. I was like a Monday or a Tuesday, and I saw this homeless guy sleeping in front of our church steps, which would often happen. And he was talking to himself and kind of rolling around in his sleeping bag. And so I went back in the kitchen to get my food for the day, and I was going to cook him my food and bring him my lunch and serve him a hot meal and just sit there and tell him how much God loves him and pray for him. And I'd spent about 10 minutes cooking it was like a hot pocket or something. Didn't eat healthy back then. And I was walking back out to the foyer. And when I got back out there, my pastor had called the police, and they were strapping this guy to a gurney, and like the ambulance people were, and they were going to wheel him out and then take him to wherever they take homeless people on drugs. And the pastor was kind of standing there, approvingly, like, yes, go on, get him out of here. And the guy started cussing, and he was like, am I allowed to cuss on your podcast?
Yeah, by all means. Piss shit, fuck,
okay,
whatever. Yeah.
So he was like, fuck you, church motherfuckers, fuck you, church motherfuckers. And he just kept saying that. And I thought it was really funny, actually. But the policemen were like, oh, come on, man, not in the house of God, save that language for outside. And my pastor kind of went, oh, and like turned away. And it was like a Jesus driving the money changers out of the temple moment for me. I was so overwhelmed with the hypocrisy that I was like, I have to do something about this. So I said, no, it's okay. Let him say it. That is what we are. And my pastor was sort of like, excuse me, Aaron, what did you just say? I was like, that is what we are. He's calling us what we really are. And I was like staring my pastor down, like, let's get into this, bro. And he was like, come to my office, Aaron. And I was like, gladly. So I went in there and I just let him have it. It was not a very conscious moment for me, but I told him what a hypocrite I thought he was. I went through the Bible verses where Jesus says, hey, you call me Lord, Lord, Lord. And then when there's a homeless guy on your front door, you don't feed him, you cast him out. When you did that to him, you did it to me, buddy. Like, I am that guy. And because you don't see me, you don't know me. So don't call me Lord. I'm not your Lord. And I said, that's what you all are to me here. I don't believe anything this church teaches. You guys are a bunch of hypocrites. And I want to I quit. Like, I'm out of here. But then I sort of felt bad after that event because I just gotten hired like 3 months earlier, and they had hired me to be like the new young guy who would come in to bring more young people
Mm.
in, and I was the worship leader, and it was really hard for them to find a worship leader in the Bay Area. So because I felt bad about the way I let my pastor have it, I apologized and I said, "Look, I'm willing to stay for another 3 months to give you guys more time to find a new worship pastor." So we kind of worked out a deal where I didn't have to stay for the sermon and stuff. He appreciated the nod I gave him, but it was the worst 3 months of my life, man, being in that place. I was at a point in my spiritual walk where I was completely done with that religious archetypal view of God. And I was so desperately hungry for like deep spiritual truth that being there was just, you know how it is, was just insufferable every Sunday. So I'm like reading Zen and stuff on the weekdays and then going to this super fundamentalist church and leading worship on Sundays. So it felt like I was living a double life. So it felt really good to be done with that. And then, as I expected, my divorce happened a few years later because my ex-wife just wasn't making that transition with me like I was. So I really almost like blew up my entire life and started from scratch and got to kind of reinvent myself.
Damn, bro. I mean, it's a wild story. I find it interesting. There's a couple things I find interesting. The main one that I think most people can relate to is the idea of that, or maybe not most people, but at least that I can relate to, is that tension that you were feeling in that last 3 months that you were working there. I could feel it in your voice, that tension of, I know I'm not where I'm supposed to be. And that
Yeah.
was somewhere where I was a software engineer at the time. And that feeling is kind of my catalyst push was to quit my job, uproot my life in San Diego, and, travel the world. And first of all, I mean, again, kudos to you for pulling that off, because I know that's such a crazy feeling of, holy shit, like, what's about to happen.
Mhm.
But man, the other thing that's really sticking out to me, and I'm not sure if this is something you've thought about, is that craziness, the crazy, the homeless person who may or may not have been on drugs, maybe probably was, having that, I forget the exact words, but fuck you, church people, fuck this, like, this isn't
Mhm.
the energy of this, you're not representing what you claim to be representing. At least that was
Yeah.
the
Even the homeless guy knew it.
right. And so here's where this is something I've been thinking about or toying with a lot lately, and it's the idea of how gray the line is between crazy and genius. How much how we don't really know what the difference is between crazy and genius. And
Yeah.
I this is something I also saw in some of Dolores Cannon's work. I'm not sure if you're familiar with her.
Oh, yeah.
Have you read, I forget which book it was, but there's one book where she starts talking about how somebody was like toying with the fabric of, like, I guess there's like this like cloth or something of everyone's life is kind of intertwined, and it's like this like very long
Mhm.
carpet, and how somebody basically, was shown this tapestry, and they basically went mentally insane in the real world, like in our physical reality. They went insane because they were
Mhm.
exposed to such a thing. And reading that passage, or that story, it really had me shown this different light on kind of homeless people, right? I mean, you see so many of them that just run around kind of just mouthing the words that come to their head, right? This stuff that we would label as crazy, but you could see that there might be truth to what they're saying. It's kind of this like unfiltered dialogue that they're having with themselves, but just projecting it out into the universe. And so I don't know. I mean, I guess it sounds like that's something you've thought of before, but I guess, where do you kind of sit in this whole realm of crazy versus genius, and how do we even decipher between the two of them?
Mhm. That's a great question and one I've never been asked before. So the first thing that comes to mind is I think that a lot of what genius is at the time when it happens looks crazy to the mainstream way of thinking. And so often what's called crazy ends up being genius later, right? So that's one way of looking at it. The other way I look at it is looking at somebody like Kanye,
Mm,
where, Kanye, like 98% of what that dude says is fire. I mean, he's so on point. He has such a high level of awareness of how the world works and the deep systems that really run things. and what needs to be done for us to transcend those systems and really become unified. And then like 2% of what he says might be a bit of his ego coming out, or he doesn't verbalize it well. And then people write off 98% of the other stuff he says as crazy. And it's like, no, it doesn't work that way, right? You can be an absolute genius in one area and then be unintelligent in another area, and they don't negate each other. And that's the paradox of the human experience, is that we have like these two versions of us, or two selves in a sense. We have the lower self and the higher self, or we could say the not self and the true self. The lower self is the animalistic self that's made up of the drives and the urges to gain pleasure and to avoid pain and be egocentric and selfish. It's our survival based self. And it's not really what we are ultimately. It's a very temporary, transient aspect of us. What we really are is the spiritual self, the eternal self that always exists in the mind of God. And that's where all genius comes from, right? That's where true intelligence comes from. So the degree to which somebody's tapped into that higher self, they can express that genius, the innate intelligence within them. But if they haven't fully healed or transcended the lower self, there can be a bit of that happening at the same time. And because the egoic mind is so dualistic, it can't accept that both can happen or both can be true, where someone can have some crazy stuff that's not really healed yet in them, that they're not aware of, and they can be a super genius in another area. So ego just tries to write everyone off with a single label: crazy or genius. You can't be both. You're one or the other. And I actually saw this for myself working at Google. When I was a personal trainer at Google for 4 years, I had these clients who, like you, were software engineers, and they're working at Google. So they're like genius level engineers. Like if they took an IQ test, I'm sure they'd be like 160 or more, super, super intelligent when it comes to one area of intelligence, right? Like linear intelligence. But when it came to other areas of intelligence, I could see that they were almost, mentally handicapped. They were so deficient in other areas of intelligence, like social intelligence. I would have one of my clients almost every week. He would walk in, from the weekend. We meet on Mondays. I'm like, "Hey, David, how was your weekend, man?" And he would stare at the ground and blink rapidly. And then he would look up at me and say, "It was good." And I'm like, wow, look at that. Like he's so intelligent with linear intelligence that he handles everything in life through linear intelligence. So he goes through his mind and thinks, what is the most accurate possible response I could make? And then scans all the options. And the best option ends up just being good, right?
Yeah.
But he still had to go through all the options to make sure. And it's like, well, when it comes to social intelligence, it's not linear, right? It's very feminine, it's feeling based, it's emotive. So you just are trying to connect with somebody. You're not trying to give the most accurate possible answer. So there's different kinds of intelligence. And I think a person like Kanye is probably expressing many different kinds of intelligence at different levels.
Well, first of all, I'll give a shout out to Kanye because I love that you brought him up. Always a favorite of mine to discuss. Honestly, one of
Same.
the more viral clips that I had on my Instagram was about Kanye. So I'll be sure to clip this up and throw it on there as well.
Nice. He's the Tupac of our generation.
It's really amazing to me, and I think you hit the nail on the head with how we can view people. It's either like we almost still have this binary approach to genius and crazy, right? And
Right.
maybe that's a good point of my question, right? Is like, well, where does genius become crazy? Where's crazy genius? And it really comes down to what the topic is that the person's talking about, right? I don't think, like, whether people have their personal vendettas of them in whatever regards, I don't think there's a sane person who can say that he's crazy whenever it comes to music. Like his music is pure genius. And where it kind of gets interesting for me, and I feel like there has to be this level of the articulation of it. And this kind of touches on where you're speaking of in regards to the feminine, the feeling into what feels right, what makes sense. But then if you're not able to actually articulate that in a way that makes sense, it comes across as crazy. It comes across as something that we need
Exactly.
to dispel, dismiss, say, this is
Yeah.
all bullshit. But then if we bring it back to stuff like the law of one, it's like, this is a version of me. There's a version of me in here. There's a nugget of truth in here that I need to pay attention to. And something I always mention to people, there's a rant that Kanye goes on at TMZ. I don't know if you've seen this video. One of my all-time favorites. If you're listening and haven't seen it, just search Kanye West TMZ rant. It's probably like 5 years ago. Every single time I
Okay.
watch it, there's like a new thing that comes out. He starts talking about like mental prisons we're in. He starts talking about the
Yeah.
medication, the way we're medicated. And it comes across incoherent at times. But every single time I listen to it, there's like a new layer of it that like evolves in my mind. I'm like, oh shit, like I didn't catch that the first time I heard it. Or, oh shit, now I see what he's saying. But it's almost like there's this issue, or not issue, but a challenge for us to be able to take this unknown thing, the infinite divine soul that we are incarnating as, and try to articulate that into this three-dimensional physical world where if you're not articulating it precisely, and not only that, but defining terms in the way that other people understand them, then you can get
Mhm.
completely drastic outcomes by the way other people interpret what you're saying.
Yeah. Have you done plant medicines much in your life?
Oh, yes.
Okay. So you know how it is, right? When you have a very intense psychedelic experience and then somebody asks you to explain it or you try to explain it and you just ramble like an idiot
Yeah.
and that you kind of lose their attention. They're like, okay, cool, bro. I'm sure it was awesome.
Yeah.
You're like, no, no, no. I just can't put it into words.
Yeah.
That that is what I think is happening to someone like Kanye or anybody who gets deeply red pilled, as we say, about the nature of the societies we live in. And what's that J. Krishnamurti quote? It is no measure of health to be well adapted to a sick society,
Mm.
something like that. It's like when your eyes truly become open to the way the world actually runs and who runs it and what their real motives are, so much new data is now in your awareness and your intellectual mind doesn't have the time to catch up, which it may take years or a decade for you to fully be able to like put into words how the world works and the things you see and why you see it. It's awareness. It's not conceptual. And so this reality we're living in right now is a psychedelic experience. It's just a much denser, slower psychedelic experience that we are adjusted to. But I've had this thought before of like, if I was born into the DMT world that we see when we go on DMT, it wouldn't be weird to me, right? It would just be like, oh, this is just the way it is. And if I were to take a um, human drug that I could smoke to put me into Aaron Abke's body, I would think this was crazy and psychedelic, right? So it's the psychedelic experience to me really means introducing a completely different perspective of reality that annihilates your idea that your previous perspective was the one absolute one, right? That's what I think psychedelics really do at their heights is that they completely tear asunder our point of view of how reality looks and says, oh no, you can look at it from this point of view, from which your silly human point of view is like a joke or just an illusion. It's like a dream you're having. You can do that infinite times and infinite ways with reality because it's like a what are those things? A kaleidoscope. It's
Mm.
like there's no one correct picture of it. It's this constantly changing thing, phenomenon. And so it really just matters who do I want to be in reality? And that's the perspectives I should choose to take. So if I want to be a loving, intelligent, empowered person, I have to take up points of view about reality that will be conducive to that, like oneness. Oneness is the gateway to real intelligence, in my opinion. Albert Einstein was very adamant about that the nature of reality is not separation, but it's all intimately connected. And we won't ever know reality until we see it through that lens. So, these different spiritual truths that we talk about so much are invaluable for us to express our full potential of who we are as a divine being. It's not different than those spiritual truths. Like we are oneness, we are eternity expressing itself in this particular way. And I think that when someone starts to see that in their awareness, they may sound crazy to somebody who's still thinking they're just a body in a separate world who's going to die and be wiped out from existence. of course, that paradigm looks crazy to someone like that. But then you just have to ask the question, well, what is crazy? What does it mean to say something's crazy? How do you know it's crazy?
I still grapple with that question myself. I think also something I was going through my head as you were talking to make a parallel for people who may not have dabbled with psychedelic drugs is even the dream world, the dream realm, the astral realm, whatever people want to call it. That is so much that it's so similar to what I'm realizing with psychedelics is that it's personalized messages just for you. Like if I have a
Right.
dream and I if I'm having a dream and I tell you it, and your interpretation, the Aaron perspective of it is going to be like, well, this is what I got out of it. And then I'm like, but no, that's not what happened. Wait, you're not, why aren't you understanding what actually happened for me, the Clayton perspective? And it's like, dude, because I haven't had my whole life experiences up to this moment to interpret it that way. And so it becomes this very interesting thing of with dreams in particular of interpreting them almost for yourself. And it's good to get feedback, but and this even goes to good coaching that I've realized throughout my days is it's not about me telling you the way the world is. It's about helping you
Mhm.
figure out how you're interpreting the things that are happening, let's say for you. Some people say to you, but happening for you to understand that almost next level of understanding or evolution to take your life to the next phase.
Absolutely. It's all the universe is almost like a game of transcending points of view,
Mm,
because when you're in one point of view and you're identified with it, points of view are sort of designed metaphysically to reinforce themselves, right? And argue with and disagree with any other point of view, because it has to. It's one point of view. So it can't acknowledge all the other ones as being equally true, or there's no more point of view. So when you're in a point of view like the political left or the political right, they're always going to look crazy to you and evil and whatever else, until you mature enough to realize that there isn't just one point of view to look at the universe from. In fact, every point of view is equally valid from the highest perspective, because they're all just different ways of looking at the same one thing. So, for example, if I grew up in a household that was abusive and like religiously abusive, I'm probably going to grow up to be an ardent atheist who hates religion and hates God, right? So, Christians, the Christians I grew up around would typically see an atheist person like that and say, "Oh, that person's evil. They're a sinner. They're full of the devil." And I know that that's true, no doubt about it. But if you were born up in their shoes, you would understand why they think that, right? You would say, "Oh, of course you think religion's evil. You were abused by your, youth pastor or whatever." So that's where forgiveness comes from, I think, is realizing that whatever someone's point of view is, in a sense, no one really chooses the point of views they have about reality. We could really say points of view choose us, and they live and express through us, the person or the people, to experience themselves. And a point of view will last until it wears itself out in someone's mind, where they've suffered so much because of that point of view that something in them cries out to say, "Oh, there's got to be a different way or a better way of looking at life," like I did, like you did with religion. And then awareness has opened itself to other points of view, and then you do start to see the validity of that which you once thought was crazy, right?
no, I love that. I love that articulation so much. It's reminding me of my perspective on relationships and for the most, I'll just say relationships because I know when I was in high school and kind of when I was starting to get into college, I was very much the nice guy. And we can go very deep on this topic. But then I found a forum on Reddit that exposed me to, for lack of a better word, being a fuckboy. So I tried putting on
Mm-hmm.
that hat for like 3, 4 years. And, it quote unquote worked for, hookup culture, getting with girls. But over a couple years, it started to have me realize like I remember looking at one of the posts and thinking to myself, like, if this is actually happening, like this can't be healthy. Like something about this isn't healthy. The path that I'm going down here with being a fuckboy is not healthy in some regard. And if I'm thinking, because as a step back, a whole part of this forum was this blanket statement of men are like this, women are like this. Here's how you
Yeah.
operate at this base biological three-dimensional reality of understanding how biological structures are imposed that create a relationship. And I remember sitting on my bed and seeing a post and thinking to myself that if I think that there's something wrong with this, then there has to be a girl out there that also thinks that there's something wrong with this ideology or this nature of being. And I think when I
Mhm.
had that thought, that was like my catalyst for kind of pushing out from the fuckboy phase and into this more healthy, integrated understanding of, and I mean, at the time I didn't realize it, but now I'm realizing that that drive towards a more healthy, divine masculine energy that I believe is very, very lacking in our society today.
Big time. Yeah, I would absolutely agree. And it's really like, I don't like who I'm becoming, right? Is really what we grapple with. I don't
100%.
like who I'm being in this point of view. Who am I? Who are you being is the ultimate question. Because in a very real way, we only ever see our own state of being. We never actually see another person's state of being. We see our interpretation of it based on our unique biases, beliefs, and whatnot. So if I don't like who I'm becoming, that's all that matters. Because if I don't like who I am, I will not like the world I'm in. Right? The world is an extension of how I see myself. We look inside first, we decide how we want to see ourselves, and then we project an entire world that gives us evidence of that person we think we are or we think we want to be. So whenever you read a self-help book or get a self-help coach, that's the first thing that they'll do for you is they'll take you inwards and say you've got to re-envision who you are and who you want to be. How do you see yourself 5 years from now? Okay, well, who's the guy that can have that life? Embody that guy now. How does that guy think? How hard does that guy work? What time does that guy get up in the morning? How much does he work out? How much does he read? And they literally back engineer you step by step into being the person that you really want to be. And in that way, they're reaching inside of you and pulling out potential that was always there. But when we're so locked into whatever, whether it's being a fuck boy or an athlete or a musician, if we just have a label about who we are and we're not constantly open to new possibilities of who we are evolving out of us, then we won't discover them, right? Because the universe won't infringe on our free will and force you to realize some potential inside yourself that you're afraid to realize or don't want to realize. So I think part of self actualization is this um, owning your passions, owning your gifts and talents, while also being fully open to becoming something you never thought you could be. That's where the potential, in my experience, really manifests itself. Is that the universe, once you're open to saying, hey, I do have these passions, I want to express these gifts, but I'm also open to anything, man. If you have a different vision for me that's even better, please manifest it through me. And then you're just following the breadcrumb trail of what feels exciting in your life. And before you know it, 5 years goes by and you're teaching people on YouTube or something that you could have never in your life imagined you would do. I mean, I thought I was a horrible public speaker, for example. My worst, my least favorite thing about leading worship was having to talk to the audience. I would get super
That's kind of
nervous.
important
I'm like,
too.
yeah, like I have to say a few words and then start singing. And it was those few words that I hated. The singing I could do all day, but like make me talk to you. Oh, I hate my personality. I think I'm stupid. I don't have anything valuable to share. Those were my beliefs about myself. So, I mean, the last thing I thought I would ever be is what I'm doing today. But thank goodness I was open to those new possibilities.
Which is so crazy too, because this kind of ties in what you were saying beforehand, which is, you have a perspective of who you are, but Clayton, me, also has a perspective of who Aaron is. And everyone you come
Right.
into contact with has a perspective of who you are. And all of those are just such small fractions of the deeper truth. And where I
Yeah.
find it interesting, and this kind of ties into what you were saying at the end, is I went back and I watched, I think your first video, it was about the law of attraction on YouTube. And in my opinion, when I saw you, I was like, damn, this dude's like a solid presenter. Like, you had cadence, it was good presentation skills. I mean, obviously you've improved as anyone who does it for 4 or 5 years does. But where it gets interesting, because I didn't know this, that you were having that self talk, you have that mental self-talk of like, why am I doing this? I'm bad, da 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 da. But then from my perspective, I'm like, this dude's pretty solid at presenting.
Yep.
Like I get why, your YouTube took off. I get why people are listening to you. I understand why this is happening. And yet it's so interesting to hear on the other side of things. In your
It
mind, it
is.
was like, nah, this isn't, I'm bad at this.
Yeah. I say this all the time. I think that in many ways, our perspective of ourself is the least accurate of the whole universe. Like a perfect stranger in many ways could meet you and have a better picture of who you are than you do, in the sense that you're always on the inside of this person. And so just like when you're exposed to something too long, you get numb to it, you lose perspective about it, it becomes normal to you, and you actually stop seeing a lot of the aspects of yourself that may be very, very important or valuable or beautiful. They just become like whatever to you. And so, like you said, somebody can watch me speak and say, "Oh, this guy's got a talent for this." And the only thought going through my head while I'm talking is, "Why are you embarrassing yourself like this? Just give it up. You'll never be good at this." And our points of view couldn't be more opposite from each other. But which one of those two is more accurate? Yours was. And you just saw me on YouTube. You didn't know anything about me. So, not in every way, maybe, but in a lot of ways, our opinion of ourselves is the least accurate or the least trustworthy. And we should actually give more credit, more onus to the people in our life, friends, family, who give us those compliments or tell us what they see in us. We should pay really close attention to that, because it's like, I don't really have a good shot at seeing that in myself because I am that. So I'm like, I'm so close to it. There's almost no room for me to see it.
I love the open-minded nature that you bring with this because this is something that I feel like I've also kind of grappled with at least. And to kind of bring in the shadow aspect of what you're talking about, because I think this is super important. Being a content creator, being someone who puts themselves out in front of hundreds of thousands of people, being someone who's continuously pushing the awareness of what they hold true and what they want to manifest in the world, you are going to be confronted with people who disagree with your point of view. And it's interesting because I
Mhm.
believe that it's healthy, but then I also believe that staying away from negative energy, negative comments is also something that you should be very mindful of. So, where do you kind of find that balance or the integration of I still need to listen to people who disagree with me because, first of all, it keeps you grounded, it keeps you humble, it keeps you honest, but at the same time, they could just be projecting their own bullshit, their own fears, their own insecurities onto the work that I'm doing.
Yeah. Well, that is a very fine line when you get into the public sphere. Your ego will be very quick to want to see the negative things people have to say about you. And, the fear based animal survivalist mind will want to consider that they're all true, because that part of your mind is literally designed to always assume the worst, right?
Mm.
It's the same part of your mind that is, as a hunter gatherer walking through the forest, it's that part of your mind that's always on alert that there might be a bear around the next corner or behind that rock. Like, you have to assume the worst, because if you don't assume the worst and you're wrong, the consequences can be really severe. So there's nothing to hate about that part of you. It's not a bad part of you. It's just the way we evolved as human beings. And so that part of you will pay extra attention to the negative comments. And I'm sure you've done this since you've been podcasting as well, where you'll read through the comments of a podcast and I'll read like 100 comments. And this was more so when I started YouTube, and I've obviously had a lot of chance to navigate and transcend this in my mind now. But man, when I first started YouTube, I would read 100 positive comments. Oh, this changed my life. This gave me a new perspective. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And then one comment from somebody saying, "You're an idiot. You don't know what you're talking about. Do yourself a favor and get off YouTube." And my mind all day long is going over that one comment. And I'm like, why is this one comment so important to me when I had 100 positive comments? Why am I not obsessing over those ones? And it's the part of your mind that wants to make you better. It's like, good. If it's positive, then we're good on that end. We don't need to think about it anymore. We need to think about what we're not good at, what we can improve upon. And I think there's a gift to that. I think there's a good quality to that, where we can improve ourselves dramatically by being open to criticism and feedback from an impersonal point of view. Really, when we personalize it is when we lose the ability to gain from it, because then it just becomes a sad story that makes me depressed, and I'm not actually learning or expanding my awareness at all. So for me, I think I become so much better as a teacher through the people that disagree with me in the comment sections or whatever, because somebody will ask a question that I know the answer to, but I've never had to articulate it before. And this person is forcing me to come up with the words to explain it. And as I'm sitting there typing my answer in a kind of a flow state, new ways of expressing this idea start coming out as that divine intelligence in us knows how to get answers to the problems at hand. And I'll just be amazed at the intelligence that comes through when I have to prove a point about something I'm teaching. So I'm now super grateful for when people want to have a back and forth with me. And it doesn't actually happen very often. So much so that when it does happen, I'll always thank the person for being willing to spar a little bit, because most people will either not respond to your response or they'll just say something negative and dip out. I really appreciate those people that are willing to push back, push back, push back, because just like training in mixed martial arts or something, like you get better by fighting the best fighters in the gym, not the guy you can beat up easily, right? You want to put yourself to the test in that way. And so we should see our critics as a helpful training tool that we can use to make ourselves better.
I find there's a lot of truth in that. And maybe it's something that you kind of learn as you progress through this online societal craziness that you get exposed to with so many people just consuming something like, and I think that's probably a section of it as well, is being able to discern the level of awareness that someone's actually bringing to the comments, right? Because there's a spectrum.
Fully.
There's the
Yeah.
people who are just like, you're an idiot, and then there's the people who are like, well, I see what you're saying about this, but if you view it in this light or that light, and then you can kind of almost judge it from the level of awareness that they're bringing to the comment section, so that, and I'm sure you don't waste your time on people who are like, you're an idiot, you're dumb, right? Like those are almost just like step past, because it's someone projecting an insecurity towards you in regards to those things versus someone who's actually trying
Right.
to progress their level of thinking.
Yeah. Well, when you go back to the maxim of I only ever see my own state of being, then when you really learn that and you integrate that truth beyond just the conceptual, then you actually lose the ability to feel triggered at people being a dick to you,
Mm.
because you just understand that's just who they think they are. Like you can only project how you feel about yourself onto other people. So I may see someone who is doing heinous evil to little children or something that we deem as horrible, and I'm still not going to get upset at this person and call them names and see them as evil if I know that I am one with God. Therefore, everyone's one with God. I may disagree with their behavior. I may even have a conversation with them about what I disagree about, but I can't hate you anymore or put you out of my heart if I truly love and have forgiven myself for everything. So when you know that, it's like the negative comments you see of people trying to get under your skin or insult you. To me, it's just there's a compassion that comes out of like, I'm so sorry, brother, that you have that in your heart. I know what it's like to live with that toxic negativity. And you have to get it out of yourself and onto others. The ego makes you feel like the only way to feel better about myself is to tear other people down. I lived that way most of my life. So when I see that state of consciousness now, it's really just a compassionate response.
Yeah, that's super, super powerful and definitely a spot to go. I mean, especially from the place of getting triggered, right? If I I very quick, what year was it? I think it was probably during it was probably 2015. So during the 2016 presidential election, I remember I was so ingrained with that, like very 3D, very into it. I could tell you every fucking quote that someone said during that whole run up. And it and it struck me during that, because I was talking with a buddy of mine who was on the other side of the aisle from me, and he, politically speaking, and we were talking about climate change, and he was saying things that triggered me, and my default programming was to just like blurt out random shit or things that I thought were true. And
Right.
through that process, it showed me that whenever I get triggered, it's kind of almost showing me something that I don't know. Like, it's not that he's
Yeah.
100% right, but there's something that a part of this conversation that I don't fully understand. And this triggering is like something that I need to explore deeper. There's more answers in this triggering for me to figure out.
Yeah, you got it. It's that the ego feels threatened,
Mm,
that its point of view may not be the ultimate. And that's why people have a hard time admitting they're wrong, because they're identified with what they think about something. And so to be wrong about an opinion is like an attack upon who I am, right?
right.
And this is why I love A Course in Miracles so much, because the course really healed these areas of my perception more than anything else did, in terms of how we see ourselves and how we see others, that others are my greatest mirror to see myself as I really am. Meaning the way that I feel about somebody else in any moment, the way that I'm responding or reacting to somebody in any moment is the most accurate reflection of how I truly feel about myself. So for example, if somebody is saying something I disagree with and I'm just getting annoyed at them and I don't have patience to just listen to them share their point of view, well, that's a sign that I don't have patience for my own negative moods. I don't have patience towards myself when I'm going through something. I guilt trip myself. I feel like I'm a burden. Those are the kind of things we project onto others without realizing it, and we think it's really in them, but it's not. It's in you. And the difference is that it's not that we don't see those things happening once we heal them in ourselves. That's called discernment, right? And there's a big difference between discernment and judgment. Discernment still sees that the old lady is getting robbed across the street and I can go help save her. Judgment sees the old lady getting robbed and says, "Look at those evil bastards robbing that lady. I'm going to go give them what they deserve." And
Mm.
you run over with this anger in your heart. You want to do damage to somebody. That's the judgment of that person's evil. But I don't need that judgment. I don't need that anger in my heart to go help that lady. I just need love in my heart. So love is going to help the victim, quote unquote, and not hate the victimizer in the process. You don't need to do that, because in oneness, everyone is included. This person who's doing the robbing or the abusing must not know who they are. They must not be aware of oneness. They must not know who God is, because surely if they knew who God was in their heart, if they knew we are all one, and that what you do to somebody else, you do to yourself, come on, obviously they wouldn't be beating this person up right now. So do I add anything positive to the universe by hating them in my heart? I clearly don't, right? If I judge the murderer, I'm in a sense creating the murderer, because in the collective consciousness all minds are joined. And I mean, we feel that on a day-to-day basis as the collective consciousness on the planet keeps shifting and tilting in different directions. We feel it because our minds are joined. So if everyone's judging the same person as being evil, we're actually co-creating that evil person. Whereas if we forgave them and saw that at their core, they are innocent and they are divine, they just don't know who they are and they're lost. So we can show them who they are through kindness and forgiveness and love. It doesn't mean we don't stop people from harming others. Of course we do, but we don't seek vengeance as a means for justice. So I think that that's getting back to your question of why we get triggered by differences of opinion or political ideologies or whatever it may be. Of Course in Miracles says, anything that needs defense you do not want, for anything that needs defense will weaken you. Because in order for me to defend myself of, "Oh, don't you say that to me, let me tell you who I am, blah 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 blah," well, I must think that I'm inherently fragile and able to be harmed by this person if I'm so defensive about what they're saying towards me. If I know who I am and I'm confident in who I am, that person can say negative comments to me all day long and it won't make me upset, because I know it's not true. So if it does trigger me, like you said, part of me in the deep recesses of my subconscious must believe that about myself too. And that's why it hurts.
And that's kind of the protection mechanism. But it goes back to what you're saying, because if we're all connected, then you do believe it, because that's why this person is saying it to you in the first place. It's why this thing occurred
Yeah.
that you experienced. Something I want us to stick on for a second is the discernment versus judgment. because this was something that was very fascinating. And I don't remember how long I grappled with this. It wasn't too long, but it was with regards to relationships and other people, because I kind of was like, well, I don't want to be judgmental, but at the same time, I want to be with someone who is fit and healthy. I want to be with someone who takes care of
Right.
themselves. So am I being judgmental of, if I'm, and this is something that I've seen in the media where they'll try to guilt trip people. And especially with like this trans movement that's happening, they've done it before, but specifically with this
Right.
trans movement, it's like, well, if you don't like, if you're not into trans people, like sexually or romantically, then we're going to cast judgment on you because you're judging them. When in reality, and this is kind of where I kind of came to, is it's more of discerning what type of energy, what type of person you want to be with. And for me, it's someone who's healthy, fit, female, you know what I mean? And so to have
Yeah.
this, I don't know where I'm trying to go with this, but applying that lens of discernment versus judgment on the romantic person you want to be with, you can even expand this out to the friends you want to have. It's like you don't have to be friends and hang out with everyone. You need to discern who it is to be friends with so that you can elevate yourself. You can elevate your life. You can elevate to the position where
Right.
you're trying to go with your life. And if you're not discerning and just letting everyone in because you believe that it is judgmental to do the opposite, then you're just holding yourself back from your true potential.
100%. It's sort of just like the way we are with food, right? If like for me, I inherited, unfortunately, my mom's gag reflex where fish,
Mm,
just the very smell of fish, there's this response in my body of like, I'm going to hurl, I'm going to throw up. And I wish it wasn't there because fish is really healthy for you. And I want to like fish. I just can't make my body like it, right? So when I'm around people who like fish, I don't try to put them down for liking fish and say, oh, well, fish is so stupid and only dumb people like fish. That's judgment. What I actually do is understand that, hey, to them, fish tastes good. So that's awesome for them. Unfortunately for me, it doesn't taste good. That's just discernment. I haven't made anybody superior or inferior. And that's to me the caveat between judgment and discernment. Discernment doesn't make any value judgments on somebody, it just sees things as they are.
mm,
This person is doing this act, this thing. This person is at this level of consciousness, living their life this way or that way. And it's just not in alignment with me. They're just as valuable as I am. They're just as beautiful in God's eyes as I am. But not everyone's meant to be with everyone. Not every like in chemistry, there's all these different chemicals. They don't all interact with each other harmoniously. But that's a good thing because the full spectrum of chemistry allows for the entire universe to be appearing as it is. So not every chemical is supposed to interact perfectly and harmoniously. Some of them are supposed to repel from each other. And that's how humans are, right? We're not all supposed to marry each other, be best friends, or whatever the relationship is. But that doesn't mean I have to hate anyone or see them as inferior or have any judgments about them. Just understand, that person is not meant to be my best friend. And I think that that's wisdom. I think that when we truly see reality as God sees it, everything is beautiful in its own way. Even the people that rub us the wrong way, even the people that have completely different interests from us. I can travel the world and see every different culture that when I was a little kid, teenager or whatever, I used to judge other cultures as being stupid or their food or their clothes were dumb and America's the best.
yeah.
And now it's like the opposite when I travel. I'm like, God, these cultures are so rich and beautiful and unique. And I enjoy all of them and see the beauty in all of them. I still may not want to go live in India or something, but I love Indian culture. I see the beauty of Indian culture, right? So discernment is an important spiritual attribute because everyone's unique. You are a unique expression of the source. And so you're like a puzzle piece that fits in a certain way, and you can own that, you can trust that, and not guilt trip yourself for not necessarily enjoying every person's company you're around. You can absolutely love people and dislike their company at the same time.
100%. I think that was a beautiful analogy you had with the fish and with, just the friends and everything. So no, I definitely like, or the chemicals. That was the other parallel that you brought as well. No, that's a super useful one. I was where was I going to go with that? forget where I was going to go with that, but what's popping into my mind is going to be a little shift.
Nice.
So, insert some doo doo doo, a little bit of a pivot. What I saw something that you practice was Kundalini and Kriya yoga. I've never heard of Kriya before. So I let's start with Kriya. I think Kundalini, we'll get to that at one point, but what exactly is Kriya yoga?
Well, Kriya Yoga is a form of Kundalini Yoga.
Okay.
It is for the purpose of awakening Kundalini energy in the nervous system. But what it is in summary is like spinal breathing. So you're sitting in a meditation posture and you're breathing through the nose with your awareness at the root chakra. And as you inhale, you're pulling prana up the spine all the way to the crown or the third eye, depending on the practice. And then as you exhale, you trace the spinal nerve back down to the root again.
Mm,
So you're kind of like gently milking the spine with energy and with attention. And what that does is the spine is like the highway for spiritual evolution. It's also the highway for the nervous system in general. It's the center of really everything that makes us a human. Our energy centers are inserted into the spine, so it's kind of like the supercomputer of the human body. So when you milk it with energy and attention in a meditative format, it speeds up the evolutionary process spiritually. So much so that ancient Kriya yogis, like, are you familiar with Yogananda?
I'm not.
Okay, so Yogananda is a really famous Indian yogi who came to the West in the 30s and kind of brought a lot of yoga to the West. But these ancient Kriya masters say that I think it's something like 1 hour of Kriya yoga practice is equivalent to 1 year of a human lifetime of spiritual evolution.
Interesting.
Meaning,
Just breathing?
let's say like yeah, so like just a person who's, let's say, not super spiritual, or they don't really understand that they're a soul on an evolutionary journey that's here to learn lessons and things. Just the amount of spiritual growth that they're going to go through in 1 year is the same amount of growth you can consciously move through in an hour of spinal breathing like that. Because when you charge the energy centers with energy through the breath, you are activating them and amplifying them. So the first thing it does is it causes the blockages from the lower chakras, the red, the orange, and the yellow ray, to begin releasing some of the blockages that are stuck in there. So it's a great way to begin healing and balancing yourself spiritually. But what it also does is that it will bring like the heart chakra online over time, the throat, the third eye, and begin to activate the latent abilities in those energy centers much, much faster than if you're just kind of going through life on the natural trajectory of things.
Fascinating. And that's all just from breathing and then keeping you like your mental awareness through your spine the entire way.
Yep. And the way I teach it, and I think this is the traditional way they teach Kriya, but I sort of like to exaggerate the breath retention at the third eye or the crown. It's like you're pulling all this prana up the spine, and then you have a big concentration of prana at the third eye. And I'll teach my students to hold that attention at the third eye for 5 to 7 seconds. And I mean, you can really feel it tingling, like static electricity. It's very powerful when you uh, get into this practice. And then you exhale and you trace it back down the spine. It's it's a way to harmonize the masculine and feminine energies of the body. In the yoga tradition in Hinduism, they teach that the masculine energy comes down from the crown and spirals downwards, and it's called the Pingala Nadi. And so that's our masculine or solar energy. And then we have the feminine energy at the root chakra, which spirals upwards. And that's our feminine or moon energy or sexual energy. And so the tracing up and down is kind of like moving energy through those nadis to wake them up. And typically people will sort of gradually induce a Kundalini awakening process if you commit to a regular Kriya practice for long enough.
So I remember, I think I read on your website that you had some crazy experience by doing Kriya. I think it was some sort of like your body like it felt like it was on fire, or like there was a dragon was breathing down your back. I hopefully I'm assuming that laugh means you know what I'm talking about.
Oh yes.
So, how long were you practicing before you experienced that, and like what did that progression kind of look like in your Kriya practice?
So I started in like 2019 through Yogananda's book, uh, Kriya Yoga, The Art of Self-Realization. It's like super short, like 20 pages or something. And it was in fall of 2021 when I had my first, it's called the inner conjunction. When you hear about Kundalini awakening, most people think of the event that happens where people say it feels like a bolt of electricity shoots up their spine. And have you heard of this before?
In a different sense, but I'm going to get to that sense a little bit later. But yeah, keep going with
Okay.
what you're saying.
So it's a very famous like experience that many people have, uh, where a huge amount of energy surges up the spine and blasts out the top of the head. And people say that they see God, they meet God, they experience oneness. And then typically what happens, I think for more people than not, is that once that event is over, which it typically lasts about a minute to a few minutes at tops, is that it will set off all of the different blockages and distortions in their energy centers that haven't been healed yet. It will sort of like set them off and make them go crazy and haywire, so that some people literally have a psychotic meltdown after a Kundalini awakening or inner conjunction, where a lot of people don't even know what happened to them. I mean, this happens to people who are totally not on a spiritual path. Sometimes people fall off of a horse or get into a motorcycle accident. And if they jar their pelvis or their root chakra just in the right way, it can set off that energy. And then they go to a doctor. The doctor says, "Oh, you're having a psychotic meltdown. Take all these drugs. We're going to put you in the psych ward." And it's just an inevitable process of awakening that fourth density energy, where it's trying to take you to the fourth density of consciousness, which is the heart chakra density. The fourth density is love and unity consciousness. So everything from the third density, the solar plexus chakra of ego, has to be purged out of the system. And that's this kind of unraveling die off experience people have after a Kundalini awakening. So if you facilitate it through something like Kriya and just through having a genuine spiritual practice, daily meditation, you're working on yourself, you're trying to be more self aware, be more loving, then you're not going to have a hellacious experience like that, because you don't have so many blockages that are going to go get set off, right? In the Law of One, Ra actually likens it to sort of blowing a circuit board. Ra says if the entity is not prepared for this event, it can break the circuits in the system, and it can be physically painful, and it's definitely very psychologically painful. So I was lucky that I had been practicing Kriya meditation for many, many, many years. And so the way it happened for me was that I had actually done a type of chanting meditation for the first time called japa. Have you heard of that?
I think I've heard of it. Is there usually drumming done as well? Is that a little different?
Sometimes in like a Indian satsang, there may be drums sometimes, but it's those necklaces people wear that are mala beads.
Okay.
Those are actually called mala necklaces, where you say a mantra and you hold one bead in your finger, and then you move to the next bead. And there's 108 of them, and you go through a full round of the necklace, which takes about 10 minutes. I had done 3 rounds of japa that night, just trying out kind of a new practice. I'd been doing 10 minutes of japa each day, but I was like, let me do 30 minutes, because with japa, you can get into a really deep flow state and get into like an alternate state of consciousness through it.
Because you're
And I
just
wanted to see if I
chanting,
could reach
because you're
that.
basically just chanting this mantra over and over again.
Yes.
As
Yeah.
a
It shuts.
as a quick parallel,
Go ahead.
for your religious background, it's pretty similar to the Catholics with rosary beads.
Right. Right. Very similar to the rosary. So you can chant until you put yourself in an altered state. And I wanted to see if I could reach that through japa. And I sort of did. It was a great experience. I felt really activated. But I came out, went downstairs and was sitting on the couch with my fiance watching whatever show we were watching at that time. And I had this horrible restless leg syndrome. Like way, way worse than I've ever felt it before. So I'm sitting there trying to watch our show and I'm like writhing around, like I can't get comfortable. And I'm like flexing my legs and I can't get this energy out of them. And so I eventually, was like, oh, let's just go to bed, babe. And we go upstairs. I lay in bed and I'm sitting there writhing in bed. Like my legs are just, it feels like they're full of 100,000 watts of electricity or something. And it wasn't painful, but it was very uncomfortable. And then as I'm sitting there, I started to slowly get tired and kind of drift off to sleep. And just like a classic inner conjunction, as soon as I started to fall asleep, I woke up to the sensation of my like tailbone area, like burning hot, like someone had put a branding iron on it. And I was like, what is that feeling? And as soon as I thought, what is going on? That moment happened you described that I said was like a dragon breathing fire down my spine. Just this amazing surge of energy. Like if you could think about if someone hooked up a fire hose to your spine and just blasted the full strength of a fire hose, it was like that. And in my mind, I'm seeing these incredible, incredible visuals of it was all blue, colored blue, but like fractal geometry. And then to my absolute shock, I literally, and I don't know where this came from, if it was just conditioning, because I love Hinduism and I've studied it a lot, or if there was something to it, but I saw Shakti, the goddess with the 6 arms, blue skin, the beads and the dancing posture. I mean, I saw her like I was watching a movie of it. It was so real, and it was just this recognition of, oh, this is the goddess. In Hinduism, the goddess is Shakti, the god is Shiva, uh, manifest and unmanifest. Shakti is energy, that which creates the entire universe. Everything is made of pure Shakti, right? Shiva is space or ether. It's the space in which the energy appears and creates itself. So the two are one, but it's like the two dynamics of the creator, unmanifest and manifest. So there was this clear recognition of, oh, this is the goddess. This is energy awakening in my body. And I can't put to words exactly what the communication was, but there was some kind of dialogue that happened between the goddess and myself. And from what I remember, it was basically her explaining what's happening in me in a very scientific way, but also in a very spiritual way. It was really cool. I just sort of knew intuitively what had happened, but I could not have explained it to anybody. But as the year went by, and I'm such a huge student of the Law of One, I started to realize that this event called a Kundalini activation sounds a whole lot like fourth density consciousness in the Law of One.
Mm.
And the way Ra explains it is that each chakra is an energy body. So we have the root chakra is red, so we have a red ray body. The sacral chakra is orange, that's the orange ray body. Solar plexus is yellow, that's the yellow ray body. Heart chakra is green, that's the green ray body. And Ross says a lot of things like when the green ray comes into activation, blah, 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 blah. Here's what it looks like: awareness of oneness, desire to be of service to others, open hearted love towards all beings, no ability to suffer psychologically anymore. And I started realizing that all these changes that had started happening in me were exactly what Ra describes. So I thought maybe what we've called Kundalini for thousands of years on this planet is actually the awakening of fourth density energy or the green ray energy in the human nervous system. It's like a transition from one state of consciousness to the next. And to my absolute shock, a friend of mine showed me a channeling session from Quo, who's another entity that LNO Research channels with Ra. And this was from 2018. These guys have like 7 books of hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of channeling sessions over the last 3 decades. So it's a lot of material to sift through. But in this one session in 2018, they were asking Quo about Kundalini and if it had any relation to the green ray. And Quo says, "You are very correct. What your peoples call Kundalini is the activation of the green ray body." And I was like, oh
Mm.
my gosh, I knew it. Like such a great
There it is.
confirmation. Yeah. So that was fun.
That's crazy, man. I mean, there's a lot of things in there. The first thing that was coming to mind I do a lot of, I don't want to say research. I guess it's research, but I listen to a lot of like the ancient alien type stuff. Listen to,
Hmm.
these parallels between whether it's Hindu culture or Christianity, or trying to find where all these things line up. And this was actually something that I started thinking about recently, which is these, whether it's a blue god, whether it's uh these different entities or gods, or even if it comes down to Greek mythology with the gods that they had with Ares, or with, I don't even want to
Right.
kind of dive into all the names because I'm drawing a blank. The point being though is, I kind of am trying to project myself onto the past the way they would have been viewing it. And a huge thing that always comes up for me is this idea of not being so attached with this physical world. Like, a part of me, the way that our consciousness has evolved, at least in America, from an American Western ideology, is very much in, I'm going to say, physical science, because I believe that there's metaphysical science that the West is now just starting to kind of uncover or integrate into
Yeah.
physical science. Like, I think that's a lot of your story. A lot of what I'm trying to do is uncover this connection, or bring in the Eastern metaphysical science, the Eastern science, into the Western science. And where this gets interesting for me, and I would love your perspective on this, is that these gods that they always talk about, some, ancient, what are they, astronaut, what are they called, ancient astronaut theorists, think that it's like a different alien coming to our society.
Right.
And maybe that did happen. I think there's evidence that it probably did. But where I want to stick with these certain gods is being able to experience those entities by getting yourself to a different state of consciousness, whether it's using psychedelic drugs, whether it's a breathing ritual, whether it's a chanting thing, that you are actually able to channel that energy. And then you have this very similar understanding of who those gods or that energy entity is. And you then articulate it in a different way based on your language and culture to manifest that in the world slightly different.
Hmm.
So, I mean, I guess I don't really know what the question is, but based on that interpretation, do you see a correlation between experiencing divine entities and then the entities that are portrayed in these Eastern or even our Western civilizations?
Hmm. Well, I'll tell you exactly what I think it is. I think it is the collective consciousness of humanity. We're tapping into the collective consciousness that millions and millions of people for thousands and thousands of years have associated this event, Kundalini awakening, with this goddess figure called Shakti. And so when we have an experience of something that the collective consciousness has acknowledged for so long, we may be able to tap into a collective thought or belief about it. I think that's even why a lot of people see Jesus in their near death experiences, because there's such a deep belief in the collective consciousness that when you die, you meet Jesus. But in another sense, have you seen the show Ancient Apocalypse with Graham Hancock?
I've seen the first 4 episodes, so I'm still in the middle of
Okay,
it, but it's fascinating as shit.
amazing show. One thing that show makes really obvious is how in the way of why ancient ETs would have visited different cultures on the planet. For example, Ra says in the Law of One that they came to the Egyptians because the Egyptians were a very pantheistic society. So they believed that everything was God, which is what the Law of One says. So for positively polarized extraterrestrials, and the Law of One says there are positive and negative extraterrestrials, but it's about 90% to 10%. Positively polarized extraterrestrials can't infringe on free will, because that's what the negative ETs do. They try to capture people's free will through deception, enslavement, manipulation, confusion. The positive path is all about telling the truth and being of service and being, a loving being who doesn't infringe on anyone. So to like blow people's paradigms would be seen as infringement. Like if an extraterrestrial showed up in a fundamentalist church service and they all believe ETs are demons or something, like there would be such a crazy reaction that it'd be seen as a very negative thing to do for a positive ET. So you can see why in the ancient world there may have been a lot of ET activity over the centuries and millennia of ETs visiting different cultures around the planet because the planet wasn't connected yet. Whereas if you did that today, anywhere on the planet, everybody will know about it immediately. So now ETs kind of can't show up anywhere for any reason because the whole consciousness of the planet is now connected. But in ancient Egypt, the Sumerians don't know what's going on in Egypt, or the people around the globe in South America don't know what's going on in Egypt. So if they show up to one culture, all the other ones are still preserved the way they are. And they said Egypt was a very pantheistic society that believed in the laws of one. So they showed up and started having a relationship with them to help them with technology and really spirituality more than anything. So I think when we look at the ancient world, we can actually see a plausible reason why benevolent, loving extraterrestrials who want to be of service without infringing or giving any certain culture more than they're ready to handle would have probably visited many cultures around the world, but we don't see it at all today. And so we just go, oh, that's bullshit. There's no way aliens came to the planet back then, because if they did, they'd be here now. It's like, oh no, that's you're missing a huge part of the picture of how this all works.
No, that's a really big part of the picture. And I remember that I went to Egypt roughly the same time I started getting introduced to the law of one, or maybe I knew about the law beforehand. The point being, though, is that Ra was so. What's really interesting, right, is that Egyptians actually only believed, kind of like you're saying, that there's only one God per se, but then it's all
Mm-hmm.
deviated out, like it's all a
Yeah.
separation of that one God, and that one God was called Ra. And it always left me with this curiosity if Ra in the Law of One was the same Ra that these ancient Egyptians always talked about existing, because Ra in the Law of One says that he actually helped Egyptian civilization progress. So it really struck me as interesting with if they saw Ra as that highest conscious highest conscious entity, if it's the same
Mm-hmm.
if it's the same entity that these people are channeling. I guess I assume it is, but do you know if there's a correlation between those Raws being the same?
Yeah, what Ross says in the Law of One is that it's one of the first questions they ask in the first sessions. Are you the Ra from Egypt? And Ra says basically yes, but not the way that you think, because when we came to Egypt 11,000 years ago or whatever it was, they already had a belief in a god, a sun god named Ra. And so they just thought that we were a manifestation of the sun god come down from the skies to help them, right?
Hmm.
And so we just agreed with whatever they named us. Like our name isn't Ra, but like that's what your people first called us. And so now we just identify ourselves as Ra, which was the last thing we were named by your people. But really, they don't have a name in the sense that we think of it because they don't have language at their level of consciousness. Everything is nonverbal, telepathic. So they don't need words. They can just deliver ideas and emotions instantly, which is a way higher level of information. And so when you read the Law of One, it's curious because every session, every transmission rather, begins with Carla saying, I am Ra, blah, blah, blah. I am Ra, I am Ra, every single transmission. And that's the reason that that happens is because from Ra's density, you can communicate with any being you want to at anywhere in the universe through your mind. So it's like, how do you know who's talking to you at any given moment in your mind? Well, every entity has their own unique sort of energetic signature. It's like there's like a feeling or an aura, an essence you get. Kind of like when you think about somebody, there's a certain feeling you get about that person. That's their essence, at least in your mind. And so Ra is, let me back up. In nonverbal communication, let's say I'm going to talk to you. I'm across the globe in Japan, and you're over here in the States. You're going to first feel Aaron's signature, and then you'll get the transmission right after that. So you'll immediately know who it is who sent it. It's almost like you feel the presence of Aaron, and then you hear the thoughts, the feelings, the whatever. And so that's how they do it on their level. So Ra's best way of articulating that phenomenon in words is I am Ra.
Mm. Yeah, because so my history with the Law of One, so you're aware, is I've never like sat down and read the entire thing, but I know there's a website called like the law of one.info or something, and then you can like
Yep.
plug in some search words and it'll like come up with a list of every time that this word is referenced in either a question or an answer. And I did see that I am Raw thing, so that makes sense. And what was really interesting was them describing like what or who they are, right? And the way I kind of parsed it out is that they are that collective consciousness. Like it would be almost as if every single person on earth could feel and interact with each other's energy simultaneously to create or manifest like an idea out of it at the same time. Is that, first of all, is that like an accurate articulation of that?
Yeah, that's pretty close to what it is. As you know, the Law of One calls it a social memory complex.
Right.
So it's like a hive mind or a group mind of it's like every thought, every memory, every piece of information that the group of I think 65 million entities from Venus is what Ra is. Every single piece of data from anyone in that complex is now equally available to the whole. So what's really cool is once you're in the social memory complex, which begins in the fourth density, I could be in San Francisco and you're in New York, but I bump into an old buddy of yours and he's like, "Oh, hey, how are you, Clayton?" And I can talk just like you're there through my body because I have full access to your mind and everything about your personality. It's like I'm you. And I can just speak like I'm Clayton and deliver the same answers you would give if you were there. So it's like we're still in a unique body, but the consciousness we're pulling from is now a much larger consciousness.
That's a wild thought.
Yeah.
I guess it's a lot of thoughts.
That just blew your mind for a second.
Yeah, I mean, it's. I'm also kind of giving a dramatic pause for that to settle in for everyone, and myself included. But is it? Yeah. So then, is there some sort of free will that exists between you allowing your body, right? Like, say Aaron's on the other side of the world, and someone's like, "Hey, Aaron," like they know that this exists. Like, "Hey, Aaron, I want to talk to Clayton. Like, can you like? Is there free will on your behalf to be like, nah, like I'm using my body right now, or is there once you achieve that level of awareness, it almost happens as it needs to happen, if that makes sense? Like it would be access because that information needs to come through at that time.
Yeah. Well, to speak relatively, because when we're talking about free will, we have to choose from the relative perspective or from the absolute perspective, right? From the relative perspective, each individual soul is still individual, even though they're joined to the full collective consciousness, in the same way that every individual bee is still an individual bee, even though it's operating from a hive mind. So it's like yes and no is kind of the answer. Could the soul named Aaron choose to say, "I'm sorry, I don't have time to talk for Clayton right now," or whatever? Yeah, I could. But the state of consciousness in the fourth density is pretty much unimaginable to a third density human because again it's like a hive mind where there's no more sense of having a separate or individual will, but your will is only to do what God wills. Like you can't even conceive of having a personal wish or will because it's all seen as an illusion. What brings the greatest joy and fulfillment is to manifest the creator through yourself. So that's why I think why Jesus said, "I only do what pleases my Father. I only do what I see the Father doing." It's like that. It's like I'm connected to God's intelligence so much so that I have abandoned any personal sense. So like I wouldn't say no to that person because I don't have time. I'm headed to the mall to buy some shoes or
Mm,
something personal. It would be if I felt the creator didn't want that interaction to happen, then I wouldn't. Otherwise, I would speak for you just like you would speak for you if you were there.
gotcha. No, that makes a lot of sense because I mean even to this goes back to our the content or the comments that we read in the this goes exactly back to the comments reading comments on our posts because you can feel if someone's just like coming from this place of you're an idiot, you're dumb, blah 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 energy,
Right.
versus I actually want to kind of figure out and push the level of my knowledge past where it is, and you're willing to engage in that. You discern, here we go, we wrap this in too, you're able to
Yeah.
discern which energy that you want to consciously give more energy to elevate that collective or pursuing a more deeper truth of knowledge.
Yeah, you got it. When I see somebody who genuinely wants to know something, then they may disagree. They may try to show the fallacy of a point I made. And I don't take any of that personally. I see that as their desire to know the truth. And so if they're going to know the truth, like they want to believe what I'm saying, maybe they want to believe all is one, but there's these arguments their mind has that seem to refute that idea. So those are the gatekeepers for them understanding oneness and accepting it. So they're sort of asking me, can you get past my gatekeepers for me? Because I can't seem to get past them. Like,
Mm.
what do you say about this or that? And I love those opportunities because, again, I get sharpened as a teacher significantly from those interactions. I don't get better at teaching from people who ask softball questions that I've answered 100 times. I get better when someone asks me a question I haven't had to articulate before. And so there'll be a back and forth between us. And I enjoy the process of helping someone see something. And if they don't see it, I don't get upset or bummed out for them. It's like, oh, they'll see it when they're ready to see it. But if they're ready to see it and they're asking or disagreeing with that intention of, I really want to know what you're saying, but I'm having trouble with this one idea. Can you square this for me? And to me, that's my favorite kind of interaction to have. It really is.
Yeah, I'm totally on board with you. You can tell whenever someone's actually like genuinely asking versus like kind of pushing away. Something I want to kind of
Right.
circle back on, you mentioning, I don't think that I knew that Law of One, or Ra for that instance, was from Venus. And it's reminding me of who was it? Are you familiar with Valiant Thor?
I know the name.
So Valiant Thor was essentially an alien for all sense and purpose
Yes.
that met with Dwight D. Eisenhower.
Yes.
Yeah, dude.
Oh,
And he
yes.
said he
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
from Venus, and like, you know,
Uh-huh.
there's on the Wikipedia, there's a really funny quote where Eisenhower is like, "Can you prove that you're from Venus?" And Thor's like, "How do you want me to prove that I'm from Venus?" And Eisenhower's like, "I have no idea." Like,
I don't know. Just do
yeah,
it.
like, what constitutes proof to you? And he's like, "Dude, I don't do something," you know. Um, So I found that so fascinating. Like, there's a perfectly well documented, like, it gave him CIA access and like access to like the
I know.
Pentagon.
It's amazing.
It's pretty crazy, dude. Like that actually exists and was actually a thing. And so I guess the question becomes, is that a man, is Raw still, and I haven't really followed, I don't know if the Law of One covers this, but is Raw still connected to Venus as a whole and like the people who live underground on Venus, or however that works? And would Valiant Thor have been a messenger from Venus to, because it was during, what was it during? I think it was during the Cold War, because he was trying to like help prevent us
Mhm.
from nuclear destruction. And that was kind of like, I think, his mission at the time for coming. But I guess the question becomes like,
Yeah.
is that, I I don't know what the question is. Maybe there isn't one.
I totally get it. Yeah. So to be from Venus doesn't necessarily mean that they live on Venus currently, but that's the planet of their origin,
Mm,
of their species origin. Every species apparently obviously has to be born on a planet, evolve on that planet, and then evolve enough that they can star seed and travel, which means they have to understand certain technologies and physics and laws of the universe. So Ra is in the sixth density of consciousness now. So they haven't lived on Venus for, I think, a few billion years. But what's interesting is that Ra says they actually describe Venus very well in the Law of One. They say that it was a harshly bright planet compared to yours, which makes sense because it's closer to the sun than the Earth is. And they said that the temperature swings were a lot more severe on their planet, still habitable, but like imagine if it was like the Mojave Desert during the day and then, the Arctic at night. Like it's pretty harsh contrast of experience. So you're gonna have to figure out a way to adapt. So Ross says, because our living situation was not as harmonious and perfect as yours is on Earth, We actually were forced to become one and be unified and figure out how to survive on that planet. We didn't have the luxury of disagreeing over something, you know?
Mm.
And on your planet, everything's so picture perfect. You guys have all kinds of differences about stuff and then go to war over them. It's like we didn't have the luxury of going to war with each other. Our planet's going to war with us every day. So it creates
Oh, that's
unity, which is
hilarious.
cool.
That's hilarious.
So
We didn't have the pleasure to create war.
we didn't have the
I need to
luxury.
acknowledge that for a second. We have the
Yeah.
luxury to create war. Yeah. All right. Sorry. Good.
It's a good problem to
Yeah.
have, I
Yeah.
guess.
That's hilarious. I mean, I don't know. Maybe it's not something to laugh about, but I don't know. I just needed to acknowledge that real quick.
Well, it's like we must have a lot of luxury on this planet, man.
Yeah. We're so grateful to have war.
Yeah.
I just had to make a point of that. But yeah, sorry. Go ahead with what you're saying.
It's sort of like rich planet problems or something.
Yeah.
Like our planet's so good, we actually have a lot of problems.
Yeah, it's like the white people problem. It's like the first world country problem. First world problems. That's what
Exactly.
it is. Yeah.
Yeah. So what's cool is that in 2019, and I remember freaking out when I saw this from NASA in September of 2019, they pronounced that right at about 2 billion years ago, Venus would have almost certainly had biological life on it
Whoa.
because it was at a point in its uh, orbit or just age or something that allowed it to be in the Goldilocks zone. And then Ross says the planet we transcended through fifth density and then eventually sixth, where you're pretty much just pure light at that point, and you can materialize a physical body through thought. So that's why Thor, for example, Valiant Thor, could appear like a person. It's because he doesn't really have a body. His body is pure electromagnetic energy being orchestrated by consciousness. It's under the control of conscious awareness, right? So you can just think of what a person looks like and look like that person because light is information, energy is information. So Ra is a social memory complex now that doesn't live on a certain planet. But if you ask Ra, where are you from? They know you mean what planet are you from, right? Because we're talking to an Earthling. They think they're from Earth. So they're asking where we're from. So they're going to say Venus for sure. But I think if they had asked Valiant Thor, like, oh, do you live on Venus right now? What are your living circumstances like? They would have probably said, oh, no, I don't live on that planet anymore, but that's where I'm from.
Yeah, it's always interesting because I do channeling work on the side as well. And it's always interesting the way that you articulate something can have a drastically different outcome.
Yeah.
I've experienced that with my dreams as well. Where was I going to go? Oh, the single thought or the thought. What was it? Like they can create the idea of being able to create something out of a singular thought or thought construction.
Mm-hmm.
This was something that I read pretty in depth on whenever I was researching the law of one, which was the pyramids. And what they claim is that they actually created the largest, or maybe all three. I forget which one, but definitely the largest one. They said they created it from like a singular thought form where they almost just projected it just by thinking it almost into existence.
Yep.
I found that to be like
pretty much
one of the craziest things in the world.
They say the way Ra explains it, I can actually pull it up and read it if you want, but the way Ra explains it is that there's intelligence in everything. Everything is intelligent. And they basically know how to speak to that intelligence in any form. And they can ask or tell that intelligence to do something. Going back to what Jesus said, right? If you have faith the size of a mustard seed, you can say to this mountain, be removed and cast into the ocean, and it will obey you.
Yeah.
I think faith was the word Jesus was using in his language to try and articulate this concept of connecting in consciousness to something, almost like samadhi, like absorbing your sense of self, like become the rock in your awareness and then tell the rock what to do. And they say the rock then, the intelligent energy in the rock carries out the order. And so, yeah, they basically imagined a pyramid made of limestone, and the limestone from whatever quarry it was, I think it's like 100 miles away, immediately made its way there, cut itself into a perfect triangle form, and made this impossible structure that today scientists don't have a clue how we could ever replicate such a thing, let alone how ancient people thousands of years ago did it.
Yeah, I mean, and that's something that seems like something that keeps coming up when we're talking about like these 80-ton stone carving stone figures that they are like, oh, well, we think, they don't even know where the stone came from most of the time. They're like, we think it's
Right.
this thing all the way over here, or this is the closest possible quarry that's, it might be on a different island in some situations, and they had to have moved it. And so then we almost deconstruct it with the physical sense of the way that we interact with the world today. But then when you take this like thought form, and I feel like this is also what comes back to the gods, because there's a lot of evidence with these ancient videos that suggests that they were tapping into this other level of consciousness and actually having very similar experiences, because they find similar carvings in that exist in the Philippines, that are in Mexico, that are also in Egypt, that are in South America.
Right.
And I mean, even that alone I found super super fascinating. With, okay, were these people actually communicating with each other in some way, shape, or form? Or were they pulling something from a different level of consciousness or state of being that they were then manifesting in the physical form here? I mean, it's a bunch of it's really bizarre. But do you have up the passage of how he said he created the pyramids?
I do, yeah. This is from session 3, question 8. I'll just skip to the important part. Ra says, this energy is intelligent. It is hierarchical. Much as your mind body spirit complex dwells within a hierarchy of vehicles, um, and the intelligence of each ascendingly intelligent body, so does the atom of such a material as rock. So Ra's kind of saying there, in the same way that you have a mind, a body, and a spirit, rock also does, or the atoms within the rock also have a hierarchy in that sense, whatever that would be. And then it says, they say, when one can speak to that intelligence, the finite energy of the physical or chemical rock body is put into contact with that infinite power which is resident in the more well tuned bodies, be they human or rock. So that goes back to the what Ra teaches in the Law of One, that every atom, every grain of anything in the universe contains the one infinite creator in its totality, which is a mind blowing thought in and of itself. So they go on to say, with this connection made, so you know how to speak to that intelligence in the rock, a request may be given. The intelligence of infinite rockness communicates to its physical vehicle, and that splitting and moving which is desired is then carried out through the displacement of energy, of the energy field of rock, from finity to a dimension we may conveniently call infinity. In this way, that which is required is accomplished due to the cooperation of the infinite understanding of the Creator indwelling in the living rock.
Might need to break that apart a little. I'm on the same page, right? And here's where I guess I go with it, is if we look at Western science, where we keep breaking things down to their smallest piece, right? Like, we discovered the
Mhm.
atom, we're like, that has to be the smallest thing. And then it's like, no, we have the Planck length. It's like, that has to be the smallest thing. And even in, I think, the Law of One, they talk about, or somewhere they talk about how humans may not ever actually scientifically be able to get to what the smallest atom, or the smallest, I don't want to say atom, but the smallest molecule is,
Particle.
particle, energy.
Yeah.
But it might be just that it's that energy field. Like, there's that energy field that connects everything and everyone. And that's what I found
Yeah.
so fascinating about this idea of, what Jesus even says, where, you can tell a mountain to move and it will move. We try to we try our best to try to articulate how that means in our present reality with what we understand, and try to pull things out. But what if there's just a literal meaning, that you can get to this place of pure thought, pure consciousness, where you can literally tell every little thing to move? And
Yeah.
it got interesting too, because they might actually talk about this in Ancient Apocalypse, where a lot of chanting was noticed, I think, in some aspects of moving rocks or moving boulders. And it might be
Mhm.
that the chanting would synchronize multiple people's brainwave function, or brainwave,
Yeah.
to actually create the outcome or the reality of just moving a simple rock and fitting it into this perfect alignment with everything else.
I think you're onto something, man. That'd be an interesting experiment to conduct if you could get a room full of people to, like ancient civilizations had these tribal mantras. They would have stuff like that. And you have to wonder if that's not actually a kind of sound technology they discovered, where if you have a couple guys trying to move some huge boulder and by themselves, there's no way. But if a group of people, like 100 people or whatever, are encircling them and making this chant, and they're getting into the same brainwave state, then it's like the strength of the collective consciousness may be in some way be able to channel through them, and then they can move these enormously heavy boulders that we just look at today and go, well, how could people have ever done that? There may be, technologies like that because we think all ancient people were stupid and we're smarter than them, that they couldn't have possibly had. And I think it's probably the opposite. I think we're so obsessed with our devices and stuff that we're missing out on all of these other possibilities in the universe around us.
Dude, I'm on the same page because where my mind's going is I used to play sports, and football is a perfect example. Like
Oh
you
yeah.
have chants, you have these, you see it still today. I think there's who went
Oh
something
yeah.
went viral recently. Maybe it was like a rugby team from Hawaii or something, where they like had this like opening chant where they were like doing this dance.
Yep.
And I mean, think about it, right? You're getting everybody into the same physical, the same conscious, the same energy. You're stimulating all the senses as you possibly can to get you
You're
into the
becoming
same
one.
becoming one. Yeah, there it is. The law of one. you're you're becoming this unified organism in order to carry out a
Yep.
specific goal or desire. And if you can sync all of your brain waves to that outcome, that desire, that reality that you're envisioning, then why, like, it just makes perfect sense to me that it would be possible. It's just that we are so separated. We all have different desires. We all are either operating from a place of ego or greed or lower vibrational frequencies that we don't care about one another. So we don't want to create great things. We would rather tear them down in our current society.
Right. All power comes from unity, man. I mean, that's what power is unity in action. And I think whether it's football, whether it's, ancient war chants with the drums and the chanting, there's many stories of ancient battles where two armies are coming to meet each other and one of the armies has the drums playing. That's why this was a very popular thing back in those times, was to have drums and instruments and a kind of like chant that the whole army would learn together, because when the opposing side hears that coming, they feel the power of your collective energy coming at them. And if they don't have their own chant and their own unifying mechanism, they're all kind of in a separate mind, like, what's going to happen to me? And they're going to get afraid, right? They're going to feel intimidated. So, like, most wars in ancient times would begin with these tribal chant offs of like which side can feel more ferocious, the fastest. And then the war begins. And it's like, what better way to go into whether it's a team sport or like tribal combat or something where you have to work as a group to accomplish this task? What better way to go into that, right, than getting into this super unified state through a kind of chant like that?
Dude, there's got to be so much truth to it. Maybe got to figure out a way to organize this to test it.
We got to
I
test
gotta
this, man.
test this. I feel like one of the caveats might be is to actually find people who are maybe, I don't want to say like in, but at least progressing from 3D to 4D, right? Because if you get people that too many people that are in kind of like a fear-based physical construct reality, they're probably not
Right.
going to be able to put the same energy into it.
Nope. Yeah, 100%. It's all about the state of consciousness you're in. It's not just, the technique is never the thing itself. So, like, if you had, talking about like supernatural things or psychic abilities, yeah, if you get a bunch of ardent, skeptic, atheist scientists to try to conduct this experiment like that and just do a technique that a Reiki healer would do or a telepath would do, they're not going to get any results and they're going to say, oh, this is bullshit. Bunk, we just proved it. But it's like, no, get into the same state of consciousness that the telepath or the Reiki practitioner is in, and then do that and see what actually happens. That's to me where science and spirituality will inevitably have to meet one another, because we will get to the point where, and this, we're sort of at this point already, and a lot of it is suppressed, obviously, but people are going to have the ability to levitate, read minds, uh, remote views with 100% accuracy, to the extent that science can't deny that it's a true phenomenon. And then in order to study it, scientists will have to become spiritualists in some way, start meditating, start practicing these things so you can see for yourself if there's validity to it, right? At a certain point, we're going to see science and spirituality have to do this, I think.
Yeah. No, it seems inevitable. I mean, but I mean, I guess as you say that, there have been no lack of catastrophes that have plagued humankind whenever they take their eye off the ball. So there definitely has to be some sort of grounded nature whenever approaching these topics to enlighten people, right? But
Yeah,
it's interesting too, because the thing that's coming to mind for me is the idea of cloud bursting. Are you familiar with this?
I think so, but
Where you can,
explain it a little
if
bit.
you kind of just picture a cloud, or like you don't have to picture a cloud, you see a cloud in the sky and you focus your energy on it. Usually you got to start with a small one, but you can actually like burst it or like disseminate it out
Uh,
into, because it's like a
yeah,
very, it's not like it's not like rock, right? Like it's actually a more
right.
loose item.
Yes, yeah.
And
I read a book about this
did
once.
you? It's
Not, it wasn't just about cloud bursting, but it's a book called The Energy Cure, where a guy in the book, he meets some dude at a local pool. It was like in the 1970s, and he was like smoking cigarettes, and he's getting into a conversation with this guy, and the guy goes, "Hey, I can make that cloud disappear with my mind." And he was like, "No, you can't." So he does it, and to his shock, he makes the cloud disappear. He's like, "Okay, you got lucky. Do it to that one." And the guy does it 3 times in a row. And he's like, "Okay, well, this is getting weird." And then the guy tells him where his wallet was made. He tells him that there's a problem with his car and all this different stuff. And he said his engine, literally part of his engine fell out of his car on the way home. So this guy was like super tapped in. And that's when he realized there's something to this supernatural stuff.
it's so bizarre. And I know even on TikTok I've seen some videos where people do like telekinetics, where they'll actually move like really small rocks by just like kind of like waving their hand over it. And
Yep.
some of them can be faked, but like there's even ones where people will put like glass jars on top of like aluminum foil with just that sitting on like a pin, and they'll be able to spin it. where
Yeah.
where I was where was I going with this? Oh, I think it comes back to the collective consciousness of us, because I was explaining this idea of cloud bursting to a friend, and I'll leave it ambiguous, but I was explaining it to someone and they were super interested in it. They were like, "Is this really a thing?" Like they were on that edge of like, "Prove it, but I don't believe it" kind of deal. And I was like explaining it to him, and we were kind of in a group setting. And so then there was like a running joke between us about cloud bursting. And so then we actually re-entered the group, and I said something about cloud bursting, and I repeated it to like the group or like another person. So person B now heard the idea of cloud bursting, and they were like, "Okay, basically like that's not real, that's bullshit," you know. And then person A, who I was originally telling us to, was like, "Oh yeah, like I didn't believe it, like I was just kind of like I didn't believe it like
Yeah.
this." And I saw that switch happen.
I'm not one of them.
Yeah. I saw that switch happen so quickly in front of my eyes that I was like, it was just a fascinating experience, because
Yeah.
of like that. It's like that grip of societal, either societal pressure or like somehow from the collective consciousness, that we all kind of have to believe that these things are real, or they are able to be done. Otherwise it's not going to be done. It's almost like the power of not believing in it is just as powerful as the power of believing in it.
Yeah. No, you're right on it. That's exactly what it is. I think the collective consciousness drastically determines the nature of things on the planet based on what's accepted and what's not. The 4 minute mile is a great example of
I
that,
love
right?
it. I love that example. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like what we think is possible is what becomes possible, and vice versa. I even think that um, physical disease, sickness, I
Well,
think in large
before we
part.
get off of it, do you want to explain the 4 minute mile before, in case no one's heard of it
Oh,
before?
sure, sure. I actually don't know exactly what the story is, but basically, the 4 minute mile had never been broken, and people thought it was impossible. In fact, like um, exercise scientists and people like that said there's the human body's not capable of breaking the 4 minute mile. And then finally one guy did it. And then what is it like? just within a year, like 3 other people did it or
I think it
something.
was more than that. I think it was like upwards of 10 did it within like the year after someone broke it.
Wow.
Something like that.
Yeah. So it's like that's the power of belief, right? I think that sickness is also like that because we all believe, the majority of us believe, that we're not living in a spiritual universe, but we're living in a material universe where death and disease and sickness and lack are normal and really exist. Well, then that's the reality we're going to create for ourselves. But even Ra explains that sickness is just a disconfiguration of energy in the body, and all energy follows the mind. So it's like as soon as I believe that I'm in a material universe of separate physical particles that are not one with each other, like that invites the possibility of disease in and of itself. So we have a lot of correction to do in our belief system as a planet before we can get into that fourth density state where Ra explains in the fourth density, there's no sickness, there's no such thing as disease. The lifespan of a fourth density being is like 90,000 years. So it's like it's just a higher state of consciousness, but with that comes a more advanced physical vehicle.
It's crazy, man. And that's where it gets interesting, I guess. Like, if do you feel like there's a cap on the consciousness that you're able to attain specifically in relation to the collective consciousness? Like, do you think that you need to raise the like there's almost a cap on the level that you can hit until the collective consciousness raises to that kind of same level that you're at? Like, where do you feel like that balance kind of lies?
I actually think about this question all the time.
Hell yeah.
Uh, I mentioned at the beginning that I grew up seeing healing miracles happen all the time. And in fact, as a kid, I would pray for people in my church, and I saw all kinds of miracles when I was a
I
kid.
was hoping we were going to get back to the miracles.
Yeah, I knew we'd come full circle. Um, so I practice this now from a totally different viewpoint than as a Christian. As a Christian, we were taught, we ask God, and if we're not a sinner, if God's in a good mood, God will heal someone. But that's very clearly not how Jesus walked in the supernatural. For Jesus, it seems more like he was just walking in a way higher level of awareness than the average person on the planet was. It's where he didn't, when he saw somebody with leprosy, he didn't actually see a sick person. He saw somebody whose mind was sick, who believed that they're a separate being apart from the source. And so, because I like to say one person in God is a majority, because he knew from a higher state of awareness, you are one with the creator. Therefore, there is no sickness in you. He could sort of call that person's true potential into being. And what seems to happen is a physical healing. But I think what Jesus was seeing is that in God, every idea of the universe exists in its perfect eternal form. So, the perfect idea of man, for example, the perfect idea of planet, and all these things. And then everything else we see in the universe is the infinite varieties of manifestations of that one idea. So, flower, for example, we could say that flower is one perfect eternal idea in God's mind. But because God's infinite, all of God's ideas are also infinite in potential. So that one idea of flower manifests on earth as all the different species of flower we see, all the colors, shapes, and sizes. That's like what God is like, right? So each one of us is a different possibility of the one perfect idea of man. And what the Bible calls that one perfect idea of man is Christ, right?
Mm.
Christ is the word they use for that perfect idea of man that Jesus, the human person who lived 2,000 years ago, realized in himself and fully manifested and fully demonstrated it. So, in the perfect idea of man, there's no sickness. So, because Jesus was living from that awareness that these things don't actually exist in God, they're just distortions of people's minds that manifest in the body, they can be healed from a higher level of awareness. So I practice this in my own life when I get, like a little injury at the gym, or I get a headache, or I get a stomach ache. I'll practice raising my awareness to the eternal realm where I can actually not just intellectually, but spiritually connect with the knowledge that in God there is no sickness, there is no pain, there's no lack. I mean, this is how we manifest abundance as well, right? We have to feel abundant inside of ourselves for that abundance to manifest. If I'm just focusing on my problem of lack, I'm so poor, please give me money, please give me money. I'm just believing in lack more and more, right? I have to lift my eyes away from lack altogether and know that only abundance is really true.
Mm.
So, like, only abundance has truth behind it. Lack doesn't have any truth behind it. There's no lack in the creator. So it's like a dream that humanity dreams when they don't know who the creator is, when we're not aware of what God is, infinite abundance, perfect wholeness, eternity, infinite. When we don't know that, we manifest the opposite of those things, which is sickness, scarcity, evil, and so forth. And that goes back to what we said earlier about why you can't judge anybody. It's like they just don't know who God is. So all we should do is be showing them who God is. We shouldn't be judging them for that. I think that's how it works. So if the collective consciousness has a strong belief that sickness is real and death is real, then I don't know if this is true, but it feels true that may make our job more difficult to demonstrate healing or abundance when we're under that collective energy field. And maybe if we went to a planet where everybody knew that abundance is all that there is and health is all that there is, then maybe we would just walk in perfect health there, no problem. I don't know if that's true, but it sort of tends to seem that way, at least.
No, I think that there's a lot of truth to that. I almost in my life, I don't think that that's questionable because I made a big thing that I've been working with a lot are dreams recently. So like I'll set an intention before going to bed and say,
Mhm.
I'll say like I'll ask a question or I'll ask it to show me something, and then a story plays out in my dreams, and then when I wake up, I try to interpret the dream of like what it means. I know whenever I'm a kid, or in the movies even, whenever a little kid has a nightmare, the classical example is that the mom and dad tell them that it's not real, that it's not a thing, go back to bed. It's not, we're told and we're programmed that things aren't real. We're programmed that
Right.
there's scarcity. We're programmed that, if you're in an abusive relationship, you likely saw your parents in an abusive relationship. It's almost just the programming that happens. So if you are programmed to believe that you can create a pyramid with just pure thought form, if you're programmed to believe that all the way down to dreams are real, then it becomes the status quo of the reality that we live in.
Yeah.
Where it gets interesting for me, right, is that it almost comes to a level of what is true. So, like in what you were saying, that it's almost like abundance is the higher truth. But if as a collective we choose to align with scarcity as being true, then it becomes the truth that we experience. There's the higher truth of abundance, but we're choosing to associate with a lower level truth.
Right. Yeah. Very well said. I think we could boil it down to the size and the strength of your God idea determines your level of consciousness, meaning like we can know conceptually that God is infinite supply and there's no lack in God. But then as soon as money runs low, we stressing out, we're getting upset. So we don't really know it on a spiritual level, but we have the idea of it in the mind. So that's a start at least. But it has to go deeper than that, right? Because the universe is not made of mind. So ultimately, the mind can't actually change anything, but the mind reflects reality. And the more aware we are of reality, we could call it the spirit. Everything is spirit, pure consciousness, whatever. When we're more aware of that, then the mind can reflect that truth. And then we actually manifest things. We heal the sick, we raise the dead, all the things Jesus said we would do. It's just a natural result of knowing how the universe really works in reality. But like a sixth density being, for example, who is, a pure light body, well, their level of consciousness is like hundreds of times more powerful than ours. One of the things that I love about the David Hawkins scale of consciousness is that it really shows how higher levels of consciousness equal higher amounts of energy, because energy and consciousness are actually one, right? It's the same thing, really. So to have a higher level of consciousness means more energy available. That's why I think the depictions of aliens, like in ancient Egypt, aliens always have way bigger brains, like 3 to 5 times the size of ours, because they probably have to have bigger brains to conduct and to channel the higher magnitude of consciousness streaming in to the body, right? And so if you have that much more energy available, it's probably effortless to move a rock with your mind. But in this third density body with a comparatively very small brain, we just don't have the capacity, the horsepower, let's say, to actually do stuff like that. Maybe to small degrees, like with aluminum foil or sticking pennies to the wall or something. But to move a mountain, maybe we just need more circuitry. I don't know.
No, this is actually a really interesting thing because I think there's a lot of parallels here. There was a girl that I thought was going to be on before you, but she pushed back her date, and she's a channeler and she works with like light language. I'm not sure if you've heard of this before.
I have,
You've
yeah.
heard of this. So she was briefly saying, and I'm not going to get too deep into it. We'll save her story for her thing. But her core concept was is that she was told by source that she needed to put on more muscle mass in order to be able to receive and do what she was going to do, which ended up being to be able to transmute light language. So she actually needed her body to be bigger, more muscles. I mean,
Wow.
she's not like huge by any stretch of the imagination, but she needed that muscle mass to be able to transmit light codes or light language, whatever it is.
You're like, and then she won Mrs. Olympia.
Yeah. No, I mean, yeah. And so where it gets interesting, and the other parallel I'm thinking of is how they say that we don't use 100% of our brain. And this was something
Right.
that I'm still trying to toy with, right? But if we're not using 100% of our brain, if we're only using a small capacity of it, I don't know what the percentage, is there a chance that that percentage are these telekinetic, telekinesis, telepathic powers that are just lying dormant within us that we actually we have the ability to access, but we've just been told over and over again by parents or society that they don't exist, and by that reinforcement we've blocked off that portion of our brain.
100%. And actually, brainwave science kind of shows this. When they study the brains of monks who are meditating, monks, this is when they discovered gamma waves, right? I think in 1992 or something. They studied
It's
the
recent.
brain waves of these monks in total stillness and meditation, and yet they were producing these omnidirectional waves from the, I think, the hypothalamus at the center of the brain, that were going like between 32 to 100 hertz, 100 reverberations per second, like 3 times higher than the highest beta wave, which we thought was the highest brain wave. And yet they're completely still. Well, they found that states of ecstasy and rapture and joy would produce these gamma waves, as well as intense concentration. And again, with way more energy comes way more possibility for consciousness. If fundamentally everything is made of consciousness, and even quantum mechanics basically says that it is, then everything has to happen through consciousness. And I think that that means, like the idea of quantum entanglement, for example, when two particles become entangled, we can move them across the universe from each other. And any manipulation of one immediately happens to the other because they're sort of sharing one being now. What if that's how manifestation works? What if in order to manifest some possibility, I have to see it in my imagination and overwhelm it, entangle myself with it by feeling it and experiencing it in my mind like it's happening to me now, such that I actually react the way I would react if someone gave me a check for $1 million or whatever it is. And then once I connect to that idea, remember what we said a second ago, all ideas exist in the mind of God. God's the origin of every idea. And so if the idea of wealth or abundance exists in God, I just have to entangle my consciousness with it, and then I will have to reflect that abundance just like quantum particles do.
I mean, and usually the way people get into this is through law of attraction, and I think that was like one of the first videos that you even put up as well. I know it's something that I came across as well. And I mean, it definitely seems interesting, right? Because it even goes back to this whole thought form thing. Whereas if you create something in your mind, it like does that actually create the real thing in the outer external world that is just taking time to come into your present day existence until you actually feel into that energy fully? I mean, it seems that way. It seems to be that that's how this all works.
Yeah. Well, I think we actually get it backwards because we believe that the universe is material, physical, and it's not. It's spiritual. It's all pure consciousness. And so, from that lens, what do we normally say when we talk about manifestation? Whether it's Abraham Hicks or Neville Goddard or whatever teacher, they'll always say, like, connect to the idea you want to manifest, feel it and experience it, and then the real thing will manifest. Well, I think it's actually the opposite. It's that the idea is the real, the actual, the eternal thing that always exists in God's mind. And the physical form in which it appears is the temporary. It's the illusion of it, right? It's the unreal aspect of it, because whatever appears in time will eventually disappear. So we're actually connecting to the real and then manifesting an illusory dream version of it. But the idea is what really matters. So that's why I like to say, can I think about the most specific life scenarios I want to manifest? Yes, I can. But those are all the different variations of the one original idea. So let's say I want to be wealthy and successful. Well, then I'm going to think about myself as a businessman of a tech company who's making $30 million a year, and I make it all specific. So I can manifest that way, but why would I limit myself to that? You know what I mean? Why would I cap it there or limit it? It has to be a tech company or whatever. Let me just connect to the original idea of wealth and success and abundance in God and just marinate in that feeling of abundance that always exists in my being, in God's being. And then let's let the universe decide how abundant it wants to make us. To me, that has always worked out so much better than when I try to get too specific with what I want.
What that's making me think of is kind of a thought or an idea that I've been kind of grappling with lately, which is focusing on kind of like that biggest picture possible. I apologize if you guys hear my dog. I don't know. Can you hear her?
It's super
Super
quiet.
quiet. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
I'll push through it then if it's just me.
Probably not for you.
Yeah. If it's just me, I'll try to push through it, but
Yeah.
stick with me here. What was always a really fascinating and interesting idea is that I've been very fixated on almost the last step, the making $1 million a day, having the biggest podcast in the world. And something that has actually, it's now starting to sink in, is to almost like break down those steps to focus on like the next step. Because there's almost this feeling of, well, I don't feel it per se, but by placing such a high expectation on things, I don't feel aligned with it, right? Because I'm so far away from $1 million a day, where to
Right.
actually conceive something so improbable, it would be a huge jump. And this is almost like the same thing with the cloud bursting, is you can't teach someone to make the Great Pyramids of Giza overnight, right? Like you got to start with clouds, then you can move on to moving
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
rock. And it's almost like
Totally.
building that mental process, building your consciousness muscle to be able to take on these bigger and bigger things.
That's a great point. I think that really gets into the nature of how and why the source created the universe to function the way it does, like metaphysically speaking, in the illusion of time, for example, in the illusion of matter, for example. We know that these things don't actually exist, but nevertheless, we seem to really experience them. And I think that's because, as we say in spirituality, the universe is the creator experiencing
Mm.
itself. That's the law of one as well. It's as if the creator, because it's the only being in the universe, there's nobody else that the creator can have a conversation with, right? To be like, hey, can you like describe to me what I'm like? And then the other being can say, oh, well, you're eternal and you're infinite and you're perfect love. Oh, wow, thank you. Like, you can't do that.
All right.
So, how is this creator going to know itself if it's the only being in existence? Well, it's got to create some kind of medium through which it can slow things down and have a, like, I use the analogy of eating a steak. Like, the creator wants to eat the steak bite by bite, and it wants to savor every morsel of it, right? It doesn't want to just scoop the steak up and swallow it in one bite. And so the steak is the universe, it's you and I. Even though the creator is infinite and eternal and all powerful and omniscient, it wants to gradually evolve its way towards that understanding so it can like enjoy the full spectrum of all that it is.
Mhm.
And that's what I love about the law of one, is that the law of one shows how the creator does that through the seven densities. It's like this is how the creator divides up its return journey back to itself. It starts as the most dense, unconscious, finite form there is: rock, water, earth, air, right? The four elements. And slowly devolves from the four elements to microbial life, insect life, plant life, animal life, higher animal life, human life, fourth density, fifth density, sixth density, seventh density, until it finally takes that last step and merges back into itself through the knowledge, I am the self, I am the source. That ultimately doesn't come until the end of the seventh density, of which we are a very, very long away for us here in third density. So it just gives you an idea of the magnitude of this thing we're inside of that we call the universe. It's like we're in the most unimaginably brilliant, intelligent 3D video game of who am I that could possibly ever exist.
Well, that's what's always interesting about simulation theory. I've had a couple people ask me, like, do you believe in, oh, what a party foul.
And you told me to silence my phone.
Who sets an alarm for 5:30? What am I doing? What am I doing, man?
It must have been important, dude.
It's not. Of course it's not. Nothing's more important than this conversation right now.
In the present moment, that's
exactly,
right.
Exactly. It just pulled me out of it. But we were talking about
Simulation theory.
People always ask me if it's true, and my first thought is always like, well, it depends what you mean by simulation theory. Do I believe that there's a bunch of servers running in the background and there's like binary code that's creating me right now? Well, no, that's not exactly it. But the idea of video games is such a perfect analogy because there are so many layers to the idea of being a soul, reincarnating. And I mean, first person shooters are the best example. Like, you fuck up and die, then yeah, you like will reincarnate again, try again. Okay, you reincarnate again, try again. The rules are a little bit different, but there's definitely a lot of truth to it.
Oh yeah.
And where this is interesting and this ties in is actually to something you said earlier, which I haven't brought up yet, was you said you use starseed, which is a word and phrase I've heard before, but only used as a noun, and you actually used it as a verb. You said to starseed other places.
Yeah.
And that it was kind of that's really interesting to me, that to think of it in that way, because I guess let's take a step back for people who don't know. Like, a starseed is the idea of somebody who is from like a different star system, usually like Orion, Sirius, Pleiades, I think is a big one for me, at least. I keep hearing that one a lot. And so I'm still haven't done a full dive into it. So with this idea of the law of one, this idea of being a soul incarnating, how does that really work with the idea of like two starseed? Like, if I'll use myself as an example where I think that I have Pleiades in me, whatever. I haven't done a full deep dive in it. I don't really know for sure, but Pleiades seems like it's
none of us do, bro.
We're all just guessing.
Yeah, let's be honest.
No one fucking knows. So what does that kind of mean in your interpretation with the idea of law of one? Like, am I like does it seem, well, you took the, by saying no one fucking knows, it kind of defeats my question.
Now I get what you're saying.
Well, I mean, I guess take it for what it is, because like to me it's like, all right, is my primary source like being of Pleiades, or am I just a soul that like tried the Pleiades for a bit? Oh, that energy really gravitates toward me. Like, I really enjoyed it. Now I'm trying out what Earth energy feels like. Then I'll go to like Orion and try out some of that energy and see what that feels like. But I really like Pleiades, so I'm going to keep incarnating there more and more and more. And then it's like, well, you got some learning to do. So then you go to Earth and you do some learning there. I mean, so that's why I found it really interesting how you said two starseed, and maybe you didn't mean this, but to me it came across as if, a lot of Pleiades or a lot of Orions Iranians. I don't know the right
Iranians, yeah,
Iranians.
good
Yeah,
question.
I don't know how that's uh, if they just came to lay their imprint on Earth like during this time period. I don't know. I guess I'm kind of curious where your mind was going whenever you said two starseed.
Mm, yeah. Well, you're very close to how it works from the law of one's perspective. Yeah, when I said starseed, I was using a different terminology for it. The physical type of star seeding, which is like traveling to another star system in a physical vehicle of some kind.
Hmm.
You know, humanity is still somewhat far away from doing that, but maybe not as far as we think. But there's another definition of star seed in the New Age community that means a soul that's changing its native location that it's going to incarnate into. Like you said, maybe you've been a Syrian on a planet in the Sirius galaxy for 20 lifetimes. You're going to go try Earth out now. Well, you're considered a star seed in the spiritual community. The term the law of one uses is called a wanderer
Mm.
because it's as if you're wandering from your home country. But what's really cool that the law of one lays out is why souls wander or starseed and how it all works, which is that through this densities model, it says that the third density is kind of like the wild card of the seven densities because it's the only density you can wander to. If you're a fourth, fifth, or sixth density being, you can incarnate into a third density body, which you can't do with any other body. Like if you're sixth, you can't go back down to fourth or fifth, but you can go back to third. And the reason for that is, I suppose you could incarnate as a fourth density being if you're really sixth. The point is that it would be of no advantage to you at all because it'd be like you going back to second grade and having to take a bunch of basic addition, subtraction questions. It's like, what a giant waste of my time. I
Yeah.
want to go be productive and learn about astrophysics or something. That's what it'd be like for a soul who's already graduated that density. But in the third density, there's something called the veil of forgetting, where all souls that incarnate on this realm do not get to remember who they are or where they're from. So it's a bit like putting on a VR headset to play a video game that when you enter the game, you completely lose any memory of who you were outside of the game and you fully assume the identity of the video game character. And it's like a way to see what you're really made of, right? Because you and I are sitting around waiting to play this amazing new VR game where everyone's putting themselves to the test and they're going to see if they really get afraid or if they're courageous and bold and stuff. And so we're like, oh, bro, I'm going to be so brave in there. Like, just watch. I'm going to be like a Superman in there. I'm not going to be afraid of anything. I'm going to conquer everything. Like, I'm going to kick ass in this game. I put on the headset. I go into the game and I'm like, from every little thing, running around like a little pansy. And then I come out of the game and remember, oh, shit, I was just playing a game and I totally sucked. And then I walk back sheepishly over to you and you're like, I guess you weren't made of what you thought you were, huh, bro?
Right.
That's what third density is to souls. It's like a way to really test yourself in the fire to see what am I really made of? What lessons have I really passed?
Mm.
Because when I come here, I don't get to remember that I'm an eternal soul who's in sixth density or whatever. I have to believe fully that I'm a human being living a temporary life and I'm going to die and be annihilated. And then how do I face life then? Does the energy of love in my soul awaken? Does the remembrance of God awaken in me? Or is my soul a little bit too young for that? And it needs a few more lifetimes of incarnation first. So that's one element of third density that souls will choose to see how advanced they really are by wandering back here and going through the forgetting. The other reason is because you can be of great service in third density compared to the other three above it. In four, five, and six, and seven, I guess, it's perfect harmony for them. They're so advanced. There's no real problems to be solved there. They have to travel the universe looking for other planets to help and exploring the powers of consciousness and things like that. So they don't get the same kinds of tests that we get here in third density. And so beings who will see a planet like ours, for example, that was really struggling, kind of on that tipping point of, is this planet going to go positive or negative? Like, it's kind of hard to tell. Souls who want to be of service to a planet, who believe that they're going to be able to bring a really high vibration to this planet and help lift the pressure on that planet of the dense unconsciousness of the population, Ross says a lot of beings will choose to wander to that planet to be of service, because on the positive path or the positive polarity, you polarize by serving others, by helping others and loving others. So it's a way for their souls to progress through their evolution by coming here. But it's like a risk reward thing, because the rewards of succeeding in third density and living a very good virtuous life are very high. You get a lot of polarity out of it, but the consequences of failing are also pretty severe, because you get really karmically entangled on that planet, and then you got to spend a few more lifetimes maybe undoing that karma. So it's a decision that souls have to weigh.
That is an interesting thing, and something I think that gets echoed through some other books that I've seen with like hypnosis, where what was it? Yeah, they talk about that, but then there was something with, geez, I'm going blank. What's happening?
Happens to the best of
Yeah,
us, man.
no one's perfect, right? Well,
That's
well,
right.
here's what's interesting then. This was something that I was thinking about, is how does this relate to the instances like Valiant Thor, or even Ra being the social memory complex who helped the Egyptians out? How is it that Valiant Thor is aware that he's, this higher being, and maybe I might know the answer already now that's coming into me, but I'll just let you answer it as I'm talking about, like, wait, but yeah, so how does a alien or Valiant Thor or even Ra know that they have this ability and then are able to manipulate third density matter using this higher state of consciousness?
Right, right. Well, because they're not wandering.
Mm.
Valiant Thor's was not a wanderer or a starseed. He was actually a sixth density being who traveled to this planet, right, in their sixth density body to be of service. And that's another form of service. That's the most common type of service that extraterrestrials play in the universe. If you understand that the universe is self-organizing and self-correcting, just like the body is, our body is a perfect example of, it's a microcosm of the macrocosm, in the sense that the way that my body communicates with itself, and like if one area of my body is deficient in minerals and nutrients, another area of my body will give up those nutrients, travel them through the bloodstream to that other organ to help it out, because everything's connected and interdependent, right? The nature of the universe is oneness. So the way that that happens on the macro scale is that as species or beings evolve and they can starseed, meaning they can build vehicles or use thought or whatever to travel to distant worlds, they go there to help other planetary civilizations with their problems. And that's a way that, just like the body sending nutrients, the universe is sending nutrients in the form of intelligence and higher consciousness. And positive beings do that mostly to third density planets like ours. Our planet is kind of like a prime um, subject for an ET to come help. But the difference is that they have to wait until our collective consciousness gets to a certain tipping point, and maybe it's 51%, I don't know, but a certain point where more people acknowledge the existence of ETs and are welcoming towards them than those who don't. And then they can honor that collective consciousness and actually walk among us in a way that doesn't depolarize them. Because again, if they just showed up on the White House, we're like, yo, we're here and we're advanced and we're here to show you our technology. Like, all the religious zealots in the world would lose their minds. A lot of people would lose their minds in fear, thinking that these are ETs are going to kill us. And so those ETs would actually be depolarized themselves. They would, in a sense, go backwards in
Mm.
consciousness somewhat because of the negative effects they caused on the planet. So they're very careful about how they interact with us. And it seems like right now we're sort of in this acclimation phase where they're showing up in our skies in undeniable ways to slowly kind of introduce us to their presence, which is actually, it's very intelligent, right? When you think about it, if you wanted to show that you're not hostile to like a scared animal, if you were like in a room with an animal that's terrified of you, like how would you go about showing it that you're not its enemy and you don't want to harm it? Well, you probably wouldn't try to go up to it and be like, hey, calm down.
I swear I'm not going to hurt you.
I'm not gonna hurt you, man. Relax. You'd probably just sit comfortably on the other side of the room and just, bite your fingernails or something, you would look as non-threatening as possible, and you would let the animal slowly walk over to you and sniff you. And you might put your arm out to let it sniff you, but you're going to show it, I'm not a threat to you. That's exactly what ETs are doing with planet Earth right now. They're just kind of showing up in our skies and helping us to see that, okay, we've been seeing these UFOs now for like 100 years or more, and they haven't taken our planet over yet. So pretty sure if these guys have the technology to fly here, they could probably take us over in a snap of a finger if they wanted to. So the fact that they haven't is probably a good sign.
Right. And I think it's funny because you answered like 3 questions that I had in a row. So I don't know if we're connected to the same thing. I'm like, all right, this is the next question.
Telepathy.
Yeah. It's a real thing. It's a real thing. But then it's interesting, right? Because damn, my dog's going crazy again. Breaking my train of thought. Let's go, Clayton, focus. Better than this.
We can talk about ETs and contacts and all that.
Yeah, because because it's so fascinating how there's so many, it feels like there's so many more like sightings that have been popping up in recent discovery. And it also seems like, because this is something that I always answer whenever people talk about like alien disclosure, I find it so fascinating the people who want to say, oh, like the government hasn't said they exist, so I don't believe it. Or
I know, it's so crazy.
but what's also crazy is that the government has actually said that they exist. Like
now they have
the evidence is actually out there.
So that excuse is gone now.
It's gone. But it's funny because it fits what you're saying so well that people will find so many more reasons to discount the existence of them. You know, it's like, oh, the government hasn't said it, or oh, I haven't seen them, or you know, so it's like this like mental blockage or this mental game that they play out in order to, I don't know, hold themselves back from seeing it, or maybe they don't want to, or maybe it would somehow impede their what they're doing, like the karma that they need to work off in order to like maybe there's something like you need to work off enough karma or something where if you haven't actually worked off enough karma, then being exposed to that might actually be detrimental to your progression as a soul or something like that. Does that make any sense at all?
You're very much right. Yeah, that's what Ra would call infringement.
Mm.
And in fact, when you read the Law of One, many of the questions they ask Ra, like, can you tell us why blankety blank happened? Ra will say, no.
Mm.
Because, like, what I have to tell you to explain that is a little bit above your pay grade right now. And, you know, one of the dangers of giving ego too much knowledge before ego has been endowed with the loving intelligence of the heart and the feminine, which is what we're just now awakening into, right? Fourth density consciousness. If you give the ego too much knowledge, it will weaponize it to the worst degree imaginable because that's all it can do is control, control, control. It doesn't have the intelligence of the heart to soften and balance it with the awareness of oneness. So we just create the nuclear bomb. We create biohazard bioweapons and stuff because we can, because we have the science to, but we don't have the spiritual intelligence to use it or not use it, you know, wisely and safely. So I think that that's another thing they wrestle with is like if we tell them, if we give them too much technology, they're not at a level of consciousness yet where they would use that benevolently. They would use it very destructively. And when you see the world we live in today and the way that world powers are treating their technology and using it, you're like, please, extraterrestrials, do not give us any information about your technology because these people will weaponize it for the worst imaginable reasons.
So do you think it is that it's the people who are in see, okay, now here's where it gets interesting with power. So because I've struggled with this for a while, the idea of let's say the president of the United States having power, it's almost more like a perceived power that we as a collective give that individualized person. It's not like they actually hold power, if that makes any sense. It's just that
or the Pope,
even a better probably example than even the president. It's almost like, you know, there's these people in quote unquote positions of power, but we just assign them as being in power when in reality, if we all wanted to, you know, I should probably not say this on a podcast, but fuck it. If the collective people wanted to say overthrow a country or a government, they outnumber people, you know, 10 million to 1.
Right.
So it's not, it's like, it's almost like there's a like even China, for instance, right? Well, maybe that's another extreme. But like if every single person in China was like, fuck this, we're done with the inhumane
Oh yeah,
shit, like they could overthrow that country tomorrow if they decided to.
in a few hours. Yeah.
Right. And so it's like it's really fascinating to me the way that like the mental contrivance of these things occur. Like I know with my dad and the like the whole like COVID thing, but this is where it's weird, right? Is like, it I'm having a hard time articulating this. But with the whole COVID thing, like he kind of gets into this rabbit hole of like, I can't believe they made us like basically herd us into these like, into our houses. And I always kind of put forth like, well, it's only if we let them, it's only if you
Yep.
give up or
100%.
sacrifice this freedom for that, this obscure idea of safety. And so I don't know where I'm trying to go with this, but I just always find it super interesting that it feels like we almost give up a lot more power or don't even realize the power that we do have whenever it's just sitting at our fingertips or like we're able to connect to it so easily.
Yeah. Well, you're sort of getting into the hundredth monkey effect and all of that, and the power of the mob
Mm.
mentality, where we've seen these like Antifa mobs over the last few years, where people are doing insane stuff that they would never do by themselves, but because they're in a giant mob of people like all chanting like kick him, punch him,
Oh
like then they
yeah.
just start doing it. It's like the collective consciousness kind of channels through that person. So this is the scenario we're facing every day when we go out into the world, is that we live in a world of illusions. Like everything is really a fiction that we the people have made up because we are third density beings still, so we label everything. We're in this illusory world in our minds. So everything is corporations, like even counties, zip codes, and states. All this stuff is illusions. Like they don't exist in reality. The dirt doesn't have a zip code. You know what I mean? The soil doesn't have an
That's so true.
address.
Yeah.
It's all just earth, right? But we divide everything up because we're divided in our minds.
Mhm.
And so that's what we'll see start to melt away, these fictional things we've created to make society happen. It's only on the basis of the fictional things, even titles like a president. That doesn't exist in reality, but we give it a title and then give it perceived authority, like you said. As we progress in consciousness, we'll realize the futility of that, and I think we're going to see a society without so many labels, titles, positions, and things like that. All of the hierarchical nature of the way humans make society is what makes it a power structure, where it can be 99% of the planet can be completely controlled by 1% or less at the very tippy top of the pyramid. It's not because that's the way reality actually works. It's because we have a totally distorted idea of how the universe works. And so we manifest it in the form of corrupt societies, corrupt world leaders. And until we wake up and say, okay, we've made this mess because we've acquiesced to these power structures and to this corruption, we've turned a blind eye to it for so long, we've allowed it to fester and grow. So we have to stand up and say, no more. And I think that's the great awakening, right? That happened in 2020 was humans tend to not make changes until there's a huge calamity facing us, right? And that's kind of what happened was with this pandemic was we saw the true nature of our governments and leaders, that they very much want to place us under their heel and make us, the slave class that does whatever they say and mandate without any question. You're not even allowed to question what we tell you to do. Those demons came out of the closet in 2020, which is the best thing for humanity, because we will not ascend or evolve past this level until we stop cooperating with that stuff. And so now we see this great awakening of people starting to realize that, hey, being ruled over in and of itself is a negative construct. Nobody should rule over anybody in the world. Everyone is created equal, which means nobody should have any rights that anyone else doesn't have. That sounds like a radical concept to us. But when you think about it, that is the most basic concept of what it should mean to exist in reality. All is equal. Like that's a rule that favors everybody equally. So we're really just getting back to the basics in a sense.
Yeah, it is crazy how basic that truly is, but we seem to not embody it as much as we should. There's a really good, I don't know if you're familiar with After School on YouTube.
Yeah.
Yeah, he put together, Mark, he put together a really good video about mass psychosis. It's from the book, what's the book name? I think the Rape of the Mind or something.
Oh yeah, I know which
I
book that
haven't read
is.
it yet, but he like put together this really good, video of it, and it's about how like the people on the bottom, the lower class will say, like they almost like are okay with being in servitude, and then the people on the top, the elites as we call it, they get the ego and the pleasure from controlling people. And so there's this really
Yeah.
interesting dichotomy where the people being ruled almost allow themselves to be ruled. And
Yeah, oh,
and
yeah.
so I guess we see in China, and it kind of goes to what we were talking about. They're
Dude, we see it here in America.
yeah, yeah,
You
yeah.
know?
We subside to a lot of shit that we probably, if we were truly free, and this is where it gets interesting, right? Like if we were truly free to do whatever we wanted, right? Like what's the epitome of true freedom? There wouldn't be any laws, right? Like there technically wouldn't be any laws. I
Mhm.
get the importance of them to deter people from doing stuff, but like at the crux of it, if we were all truly had a good moral
Yeah.
compass, and I do believe on average more people are good than bad. I don't think we would have a functioning society if that were the opposite, if the opposite were true. But
Right.
setting that aside, it's like, true freedom means like no laws. It means we're not doing any
Absolutely.
of that.
Yeah. That will be how society looks at a fourth density level at some point. Once we're an enlightened civilization, we don't need laws. Like laws were put in place, thousands of years ago in ancient societies because the average level of consciousness of a person back then was way lower than it is now,
Mm.
to where like super barbaric stuff was like normal to them. Like someone, kills my goat, I kill them. Like that's just fair, right? Well, that person needs a law to say that that's not fair and you shouldn't kill that guy. Like we can make remedy in other ways. So at a certain point, we needed laws for people to be able to behave in an ordered way. But really, common law, which is the law of the land, the law for mankind, it's based on the Bible. It's the founding fathers, um, the principal law that the founding fathers instituted America upon was God's law, straight from the Bible, which is a very simple system of law. It basically just says it's the golden rule: love your neighbor as yourself, do no harm to anyone, and then if there is ever harm done, you go make remedy.
Mm.
You ask for forgiveness and you make it right. Outside of that, you have free agency. Live how you want, be who you want to be, explore life as you want to. Nobody should ever have any right to tell somebody how they can live their life, except for when they're doing physical harm to someone else. Outside of that, we should have full free agency. And at a certain point, again, in consciousness, that will be so obvious. Like, I heard an interesting quote once that someone said, crime is in and of itself a subconscious revolt against a corrupt society, meaning the laws, the way that society is set up, is inherently corrupt and unfair. And so crime is actually a response from the subconscious mind of humans saying, this system itself, I don't want to obey it. It's wrong.
Mm.
And so a truly healthy society that had a fair law system would basically have zero crime, because everyone would be incentivized not to commit crime and incentivized to be a good person. Because if the laws just do no harm, then hey, I have full rights and ability to live my life however I want to. But if I do harm to someone else, it's like I took away my own rights. I forfeited them, right? Because I chose to do harm. If that was the only law of the land, it would make everybody want to be good to their neighbor, because nobody wants to have their rights taken away, and only you can take your own rights away by behaving unjustly. But we don't live in that society, right? I can be a good person, miss a tax payment, the FBI comes to my house and takes my assets, throws me in jail. Like I didn't do any harm to anyone,
Right.
but there's a corrupt system that says that I didn't pay them what they want me to pay them.
And that's where it kind of gets out of control. So let's scale this back then a little bit to the individual, because this was actually something that I was thinking about right before our conversation, which is kind of I want to tie this into divine masculinity, because we've kind of like dipped in and out of it. And I think it has something to do with like the love aspect that you're talking about that we're starting to transition into. I noticed this like meeting or reading, whatever the hell it was, before our conversation. I kind of noticed that like joy or like the feeling of joy resonates a little bit more like in my heart center, like kind of like towards my collarbone, versus the feeling of calmness is kind of below my heart. And
Mm.
it really got me thinking about divine masculinity, because embodying that joy, being, let's say, happier, smiling, more bubbly, is something I've been trying to embody a little bit more of. But then if we look at like stoic principles, or if we look at, divine
Right.
masculine that we associate with, or maybe the James Bond types who I've always associated a more masculine figure as, that is that more calm place, that calm space of
Right.
being that rock. And where it got interesting is I felt like that there has to be some sort of combination of this joyous feminine energy, but then the flat, almost more calm energy to ground you into the masculine. So I guess in terms of divine masculinity, how do you see the combination of being bubbly and joyous with the calm, centered, stoic nature that we perceive with masculine energy?
Dude, you ask really fun questions. I love it.
Thanks. Appreciate
I
it.
appreciate it. So, the way that I see masculine and feminine is if we go back to Shakti Shiva, Shiva represents pure consciousness or pure space. And then Shakti represents energy, which is all the forms that appear in the material universe.
That conversation's hiding somewhere. It's just going to take a
Yeah.
sec. All right, cool. Spirits of technical difficulties. All
We're
right,
back.
cool. We're back. All right, I'll clip that up. Nice. All right, you're saying about Shakti, Shiva, divine masculine.
Yeah. So Shakti is the divine feminine. She's pure energy. Everything is made of Shakti. So Shakti is always changing form. She's appearing and disappearing. One of Shakti's manifestations is called Maya, the goddess of Maya, which is illusion, as you probably know. So, in that sense, we could say that feminine qualities, in a sense, sort of appear and disappear. Meaning, it's not really realistic to be in a state of euphoric ecstasy all the time. You can't really live from that place and like be grounded in reality. But that energy is very divine. And actually, what makes it so divine is the fact that it's not omnipresent in your experience, right? It's a peak experience,
Hmm.
sort of like the feminine will create a planet for a while and then it dissolves the planet and then a new planet or a new star, a new person. It's always shape shifting, right? But what's the substratum? What's the foundation upon which she can appear and disappear and do her dance, the dance of Maya, is the masculine, the grounded, rooted, like you said, stoic, unchanging, ground of being. That's what the masculine represents. So that's why I think the sages, the Stoics, people who've really embodied this principle and have raised their awareness through meditation, they tend to be more like that, is because the default mode of our state of being is peace, which is kind of calmness, okayness. Everything is just fine. We're just at peace with everything. Total acceptance of whatever it is. Nothing moves me from my center. And then within that peace, joy, love, ecstasy can appear and disappear all at once. But like those aren't necessarily meant to be abiding states all the time. And everyone's different. So some people do embody a very bubbly, joyous personality most of the time. But even those people can't be that way all the time. At some point, peace has to be our default again, which is just the inner silence, the stillness of being. It's expressed as a kind of peacefulness. So I think that that's the hallmark of an enlightened being, is that they'll have a very peaceful, relaxed state of consciousness. And I mean, if something beautiful happens, they can be in the heights of ecstasy that quick, but they always come back down to that grounded foundation.
Okay. Yeah, that's interesting because I think that's kind of how I've heard it described, where it's like the container, right? The container is the masculine, but then
Yes,
the fluid inside the container is that feminine. It can move, it can leave, it can come back.
dynamic. Yeah,
I find it interesting the way you said that, with like the joy can kind of be there sometimes and it can't be there. But I guess it's always having that awareness, that grounding of knowing who you are, whether or not there's joy or not in that essence.
right. And I mean, eventually, when we integrate the divine feminine like you said, I'm working on embodying this more. Once we integrate the divine feminine to a certain extent, if we already have the divine masculine integrated, then we achieve what's called bliss consciousness, which is kind of the goal of yoga. And that's where we actually do live in a kind of subdued joy all the time. It is our default. Like
Mhm.
whatever may happen, like if I see a little child about to get run over by a bus, I'm not going to be feeling ecstatic joy in that moment because it's not the appropriate state of being to be in for what the moment's dictating, right? So everything's equally valid from the universe's point of view. So in that moment, I probably need a sense of urgency and panic, right, to run over and save that kid. But then as soon as I save the child, that state of being has played its part, no longer needed. I'm right back into that bliss again. So we can achieve that in third density, but it's it's a very high enlightened state of consciousness that requires a lot of spiritual discipline.
This is interesting. So there's actually two different avenues here. One of them's relationships. So like having a significant other. I'm going to come back to that one. The other one that I'm actually interested in is something I talked about in the podcast right before yours, where he was saying that he believes that we can actually utilize fear mentality to get us to do things that we don't want ourselves to do. Right. So I
Sure.
guess it would have been so like I was having a difficult time trying to like piece this together in my mind of, let's use a food example. I want to make myself afraid to eat a piece of chocolate. Maybe this is kind of a silly example, but I want to make myself afraid to eat a piece of chocolate because of the health ramifications, the, diet, all that kind of stuff.
Right.
Now it kind of conflicts with a different idea I have, which is of, well, I should just love my body and just want to do things for the highest good of my body because I love it. So I just would rather focus my energy towards eating an apple because of the energy of love versus the energy of fear.
You got it.
So like where do you kind of sit in that paradigm of, trying to embody this fourth density mentality and utilizing fear or lower vibrations to prevent yourself from doing other things versus focusing on higher vibrations to do the things you want to do?
Yeah, great question. Really, what we're talking about here is negative polarization versus positive polarization. The negative polarity is about control and power, power over. The positive is about power for, power with, power as. So if I'm trying to change my behavior or my state of being, and I'm doing it through a fear device, like you described, or like a selfish, vain motive of, I just want to look really good so I could go conquer more women on the weekends. That's a negative reason to adapt to a stimulus. So I'm negatively polarizing. So for most people, I think the law of one says about 90% or more of beings in the universe are inherently positive and will always gravitate that way. And about 10% are inherently negative and will go that way. Well, most people are going to do that for a while, like kind of like you described with the fuckboy phase. And it will eventually wear off because the negative polarization will become too unenjoyable inside of you. And
Right.
your soul is reaching for something positive. So you can make the same change in yourself for a positive reason, like you said, because I want to be more loving towards people or whatever it is. I want to be of service. Um, I want to manifest wealth in my life because abundance is who God is. It's an aspect of God's nature. And my demonstration of abundance in my life is like an act of worship of who God is. That's a very positive reason to manifest wealth versus I want to get the coolest car, the coolest house to impress people. That'd be a negative reason, right, to manifest money.
Gotcha. Right. Hmm. Okay, I'm gonna have to sit with that for a bit. I think my energy is pulling me more back towards the divine masculine, divine feminine conversation. So are you currently in a, you said fiancés, are you guys currently married then?
We're getting married on March 11th.
Oh hell yeah. I mean congrats. That's dope.
Thank you.
So then here's I guess where my question comes into play, right? Because we have both masculine and feminine energy within us all the time.
Right.
And so if we become aligned in both of our feminine and masculine energy, my question then would become, what is the utility of being with a female, like if I am, and this might be like a limiting belief, but like if I am divine feminine and divine masculine energy, then I'll never be with another person, because my thought process is that there is usually a you need polarity within a relationship to build kind of
Oh yeah.
you're like, oh yeah, we have
Yep.
that.
I know exactly where you're going with this.
So then where do you find that, or what is the help me understand a more enlightened way of looking at this, as opposed to, oh, okay, well, because I can feel it's from the ego if I'm like, well, I'm not with somebody because I have divine masculine and divine energy within me, so there's
Mhm.
no need for another person. But like something about that doesn't feel right to me. So what is maybe
Yeah.
a higher way of thinking about this?
Yeah, because that's separation, right? In truth, because we because we contain both polarities within us, then our beingness cries out to be connected with a polarity, just like even the very cells in our body do. So even though you're a man, I'm a man, we do have the feminine and the masculine polarity within us. We couldn't even exist if we didn't have both. But at the same time, each one of us is a unique expression of the creator's mind, of the perfect idea of man. So all of us have a unique balance, and it's a very natural balance of the masculine and feminine. Some people naturally express a way higher percentage of masculine. They still have the feminine polarity and they need to integrate it to truly express who they are in a healthy way. But they're always going to be a more masculine energy expression than they are feminine, and vice versa for those who express feminine. So it just tends to be much more often that people, souls that incarnate into female bodies, are trying to embody more of the feminine, and then vice versa for the masculine. But not always. There's obviously uniqueness, and that's, I think, what homosexuality is someone wanting to embody more of the opposite polarity of the body they're in. That's a very cool expression of the creator, but nevertheless, we seek polarity. So if I'm a very masculine oriented man, and I have friends that are very feminine oriented men, and they're still straight, but they just have way more of that feminine energy. Well, you're going to need a partner that balances you in whatever your unique expression is, right? So because I'm much more on the masculine end of the spectrum, I seek, I crave, I'm attracted to a woman with who really embodies the feminine. That's not true for everybody, but for me, that's what the polarity charge looks like. So I think that's why all of us are meant to be with unique people, because we have to find our perfect balance based on our unique makeup.
All right, you said something in there I really liked. Let's see if you can. I'm blanking on what it was, but it was something like finding the expression, the polarity expression that's unique to me. Well, do you remember how you worded that?
Like the perfect balance of the polarity that complements my polarity. Is that the idea?
Maybe that was it. Compliments. Like, shit. All right,
We'll
well,
have
we
to
have
run
it
it back.
recorded. We have it recorded. There was a little piece in there I should have cut. I should have went through it, but um, I think that makes a lot of sense, because there in a lot of phases. So to project my life onto this, it's like there's a lot of different phases in my life where I lean masculine, whether it's working out, whether it's, I mean, even in the bedroom, you need that counterpart that's going to come
Right.
in and then kind of fit the jigsaw puzzle that, can balance. That was it. You said balance out. There was something
Oh,
like
right.
balance, find like a counterpiece that balances me.
You need the polarity that balances you. Yeah, because
The
you're
polarity that
seeking it
balances.
inherently. Like if I have a more masculine expression, it's just like magnets, or in chemistry, um, opposites attract, right? That's a rule of chemistry. So we are like chemicals as people. We're going to be attracted to our opposite. This is why everyone notices this, right? I mean, I have so many gay friends that have even expressed this, that even in a homosexual relationship, one person plays the feminine more often and one person plays the masculine more often. And typically, you'll even see a couple, whether it's a gay couple or a lesbian couple, one of them will look more masculine or feminine purposefully because that's more of their natural makeup. That's how they like to express themselves. It's who they feel they are. And so they'll be attracted more often to a person expressing the opposite polarity.
Yes, that's something I've explained to people before, but it seems like a very difficult that feels like, at least when I've explained it to people, a difficult understanding or connection for people to come to. That idea of, how do you articulate this? The idea of like there's your physical gender, but then
Right.
there's an energy gender that you express more consistently, more dominantly
Yeah,
throughout your
totally.
life or presence or being.
And they think that your body is your polarity. You know what I mean? So if you're a man,
Right.
you're all masculine, no feminine. It's totally not true.
Right. And I think if we're going back to the if we're going back to the fuckboy phase, I think that was what the missing piece was. It was an unhealthy integration of
Oh
divine
yeah.
feminine and divine masculine, where, being the nice guy is like an unhealthy feminine, and then the fuckboy is an unhealthy masculine. And, thank God, thank myself, whatever you want to call it. Luckily, I've now seen like, okay, I see where the truths were coming from in this, but it's also no longer how I want to align, and it's kind of that soul progression that you get to, or you try to embody down the road, let's say, or at least looking back on it, it's like, okay, here's where the healthy pieces are, here's where I'm trying to more fully integrate to embody that divine nature of both energies.
Yes. There's a kind of a principle in polarity. On the negative polarity, we can say that that which one lacks, one seeks to conquer.
Mm,
So when you don't have an integrated feminine, which really the feminine represents like self-love, self-appreciation, if you don't have that, you will naturally seek to conquer women as a subconscious way of getting what you think you lack. If you are a guilty, shameful person who thinks you're lacking innocence and purity, you typically become an abuser or a child molester or a rapist or something. You find some way to steal innocence from others. You People that seek the most innocent, like children, in themselves feel the least innocent about themselves. I'm evil. I'm a horrible person, but
mm,
they'll have to embrace that part of them because it's so painful to live with it and acknowledge it and try to push it away. So if they can't heal that part of themselves, they'll make a switch to cope with it and become that thing sort of guiltlessly, and they'll bury it and say, "Oh no, this is just who I am. This is great." And we see society in some ways with the like normalizing of pedophilia. We see a part of
oh
the
yeah.
society trying to do that on a collective level, which is to say, look, there's so many pedophiles out here. Let's just make it normal so it doesn't hurt so much. And it's like, no, no, no. We can
Yeah,
never allow that to happen because that's where the greatest evil starts to take over.
right. No, that's for sure, because I do know that there's like, they're trying to, dude, what the fuck was it? I saw a clip. Oh, someone was like saying they were trying to like redefine what pedophile was, like
The
change the name of
maps?
it. That's it. Yep. A minor attracted person.
Yes, that's right.
I was like, dude,
Like
yeah,
it's
and
a new
even the people,
orientation.
and they're trying to like identify with, they're trying to get on the LGBTQ whatever train,
Yeah.
and dude, that's crazy too, because that's it's just really fascinating, right? Is like, where is that? Like, it's almost, because like, to give the devil its due, right? Like, we're trying to figure out what the most appropriate way is to this. Okay, so this is where it comes back to discernment and judgment, right? Because
Mhm.
there's probably this feeling of guilt if you're not going to include them in the LGBTQ whatever it is community now.
Yeah.
If you don't include them, then you should feel guilty because they're just people who are hurting, like you pointed out. But there's a level of discernment that we need to healthily have a healthy way
Healthily. Yeah.
have a healthy way of integrating into our society with that structure. And it's probably what comes back to the divine masculine, is that our divine masculine is weak in this area. And so then the unhealthy feminine comes in of like, just accept them all. It's fine. Let this happen. But to your, and maybe I'm articulating that wrong. I don't know. It's an interesting
Well,
idea, but
well, you're totally hitting on it, man, because I can't remember what the study showed. Do you remember the study they did on pedophiles where they found that like 96% or something of pedophiles admitted to being abused as children?
I didn't know
Like,
about the study, but I kind of always just knew that that was, I
yeah,
think, true. Yeah.
we all know it's true, but it's like we didn't even know how true it was. It's like almost exclusively a phenomenon that happens to those who've been abused as a child in some way.
It's
Even in,
crazy.
it doesn't have to be like some crazy heinous abuse, but in some way they were sexualized. And it's so to see that sexualizing children is normal, because I was sexualized as a kid and
Mm,
it felt really bad. And I couldn't live with that part of me without changing my relationship to it. So then it manifests as a desire to sexually infringe upon children as an adult, just like you were. So the mistake we've made is that we have demonized these people and attacked them and dehumanized them and forced them even deeper into the shadow, where they're forced to accept this part of themselves in some way, in a negative way, where they embody it and act upon it, rather than saying, hey, come here, brother, it's okay, you're not evil, you're not a bad person, you just have a mental imbalance that we can absolutely help you to heal. These are just traumas we have to deal with. If we don't deal with our traumas, we're going to have an experience later down the road that's going to seem evil or psychotic, and it's just our own unmet, unfinished business that we haven't attended to. That's what we've done a horrible job as a society, whether it's towards murderers, rapists, pedophiles, doesn't matter. Towards those we deem as evildoers, we call them evil and push them into the darkness even further. And then we get upset and surprised at the evil we've created through that. You know what I mean? It's
oh, for
we're
sure.
responsible.
For sure. Heavy stuff. Hopefully, audience was looking for it today.
I
Dude, Aaron, I feel like we could talk for hours. I'm getting this internal poke that we need to wrap this up.
think we
So
have been talking for hours.
we have. That's actually
We've
true.
already done it.
Dude, I always give, first of all, super grateful you're here. Thank you. I'm going to throw all of your links down in the show notes, but I love giving the floor to you. If you want to talk to the audience, tell them whether you got something to promote, whether you want to encourage them to do something, reference the links below. So, dude, the floor is yours.
Awesome. Well, thank you, man. I'll just say to put on people's radar that if you want to get more involved with any of my content or what I'm doing, I have two kind of main programs right now. One that is about studying the book called A Course in Miracles, which I think I mentioned a couple times on
You
our
said it
call.
once, and I was going to ask you if that's something you have or you're promoting someone else's stuff.
Yeah, it's probably the most well known channeled text in the spiritual world. It's basically a course in mind training and healing your mind. A lot of the ideas we talked about today are from A Course in Miracles, of projection, makes perception, and things like that. But it's just amazing, life changing spiritual text that what we do is we study the daily lessons for 365 days in a row from January 1st to December 31st. Because in the course actually has a section called the daily lessons, where it takes all the truths it teaches you in the text material and it boils them down to one teaching a day, one practice a day. And it's really just like three or four basic teachings, forgiveness and oneness, but it just teaches them in a million different ways from different perspectives to help you really integrate it better. So we take people through that every day for a whole year, and we have some master classes and live Q&A calls and stuff. So if you're looking to study A Course in Miracles further, that program is going to be right up your alley. The second program I have is called 4D University, which after this conversation, obviously you know what the 4D stands for. And it's kind of a 7-month curriculum I put together to create an online academy that's fully dedicated to the expansion of human consciousness. So it's 3 courses over a 7-month period that walk you through a fourth density ascension process, beginning with mind training. The second course goes deep into meditation. The third course is about facilitating a Kundalini awakening, which, as we discussed, kind of is the biomarker of fourth density ascension. When that energy awakens, you're heading into the fourth density. So I'm having an absolute blast with it this year. I started it in July. We have about 300 members that we're just doing these practices together every day, and people's kundalinis are popping off all the time. And it's such a dream come true to have a program like this where I can be a part of so many people's journeys and get to really like be involved in answering questions and specific issues that come up along the awakening path. So if you're looking for something more law of one oriented, then you can go to 4duniversity.com to learn more.
Hell yeah, man. No, dude, everything you're doing seems super cool, super resonant. So hopefully some people check you out, at least follow you on some of your socials, because I know it's at least your YouTube. Well, your Instagram is too. It seems like your Instagram kind of like dabbles in and out, I guess, but super aligned, man. So that, guys, definitely go check him out. Dude, Aaron, thank you so much, man. Appreciate having you on.
Thank you, Clayton. I had a blast talking with you, man. We'll have to do it again.
Oh, absolutely. I know we will. We'll save a date in the future for sure.
For
Hey
sure.
guys, speaking of dates in the future, guys, if we don't see each other in this reality, we'll definitely see each other in the sixth dimension.